Mastering in Game of Thrones with a mounted axe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51 Golden Guardeo. Apart from the stench and the crowds, King's Landing still has many advantages, which is the view Arthur came to along the way. Brick mansions, pavilions, wooden hotels, market stalls, and technical colleges are connected one after another. On the wide boulevard, the stench is almost gone, but on the winding streets and narrow alleys where only two people can walk side by side, the stench will show its presence extremely arrogantly. Looking a little further away, you can see the marble walls of the Cathedral of St. Baelish surrounded by the top of Visenya Hill, with 7 crystal towers standing in it. Not far away, on the hills of Rinus, there are burned dragon caves, collapsed dome ruins, and bronze gates that have been closed for a century. Between the two hills, Silent Sister Street is straight, surrounded by solid walls. If Arthur and his friends can fly to the side of the port, they can see the prosperous scene of King's Landing. The second largest port in Westeros carries a water transportation function of the capital's 500,000 people. Goods from the upper reaches of the Blackwater River, Old Town, Lannister Port, Crab Bay, and even Bravos, Pentus, Lies, Tyrosh and other places across the narrow sea are continuously moved to more than 100 docks on the waterfront. In the port, there are golden warships of the Royal Fleet, the Queen's luxury yacht, cargo ships from all over the world, fishing boats and other ships. There are even many smuggling ships secretly hiding in it. After all, one of the important incomes of the king is to legally collect tariffs in major trade ports. For example, White Harbor in the north has to pay a tax to King's Landing. In the original book, after Robb Stark became king, the Manderley family, the owner of White Harbor, transferred the tax money to Winterfell. The Red Keep on Egan Hill quietly watched all this. It consists of 7 huge drum towers, a huge fort, a domed throne room, a closed bridge, a military camp, a dungeon, a barn, and a thick wall. It is named the Red Keep because it is all made of light red stone. In fact, according to convention, the Red Keep, the king's home castle, is the real capital, but because the Red Keep is too close to King's Landing and King's Landing Port, everyone defaults to King's Landing to refer to these 3. Under the leadership of Desmond, 20 people rushed to an inn in Eel Lane. Eel Lane is an alley located halfway up Visenya Hill, close to the harbor. The biggest advantage is that the rooms are well ventilated. Ventilation means that the nose is no longer tormented. This alone is enough to defeat all opponents and make outsiders who are familiar with King's Landing choose this place. I heard that the Prime Minister's tournament will be officially held in a week and a half. Joel said the news he had inquired about. It should be said that King Robert called the tournament in the name of Lord Eddard. Patrick corrected the statement. With Lord Eddard's pedantry and seriousness, he would never agree to such a fancy thing as a tournament. Desmond agreed with Patrick's point of view. Lord Eddard's seriousness is beyond the imagination of ordinary people. The North and the Riverlands have been married for many years, but I have never seen him in Riverrun. A week and a half. Arthur murmured again. Enough to make a set of top quality armor. More than one set. There is also a set of mine, a full set. Jules reminded his nephew in time and emphasized the full set. There will be armor, and there will be gold dragons. Arthur comforted his uncle. The group dismounted and suddenly faced a very important problem. What should I do with the 22 horses? Because it is close to the sea, most of the guests come by boat, so there is no boarding for horses here. Several servants who have experience living in King's Landing discussed it and suggested that the horses could be placed in an inn outside the city. Although it was full of various outsiders, it was still possible to squeeze in a batch of horses. After sending a few followers to do this, Arthur and his men filled their stomachs and went to bed. The bumps on horseback these days are enough to make the strongest people physically and mentally exhausted. The next morning, there are really too many people in King's Landing now. Desmond sighed. The 3 of them were taking a few servants to prepare customized weapons and armor for Arthur. They were stuck in the street and moved with difficulty. It took a while to walk a short distance. Since King Robert brought half of the courtiers and royal family to the north to welcome Eddard Stark, all the people in Westeros immediately knew who the new prime minister was. And according to the king's usual love of excitement and scenes, holding a grand tournament is inevitable. So, since the news of Robert's northward spread, poor knights and rich nobles from all over the country rushed to King's Landing one after another, ready to show off, or watch others show off. During the past 2 or 3 months, knights from all over the country arrived every day, and each knight brought more than 2 attendants, followed by 3 or 4 craftsmen, a dozen businessmen, 2 female workers, and countless thieves. The extent of the crowd can be described in Littlefinger's words. The business of the female workers was so good that they couldn't close their feet, and the copper coins in their pockets jingled as they walked. The blacksmith shop on Steel Street that Arthur pointed out was a bit far from Eel Lane, so they had to walk slowly. According to the known plot, the Master of Gendry, one of Robert's illegitimate sons, may be one of the most skilled blacksmiths in King's Landing. Arthur felt more at ease to let him make weapons and armor. Otherwise, it would be like the two-handed sword passed down from his ancestors, and the blade would be bent while chopping. When passing by a vegetable stall, he asked his personal servant Medden to buy a pumpkin as big as a human head. This made Patrick marvel. "You are not really going to hit a pumpkin-sized hammer, are you? Who can withstand such a hammer? Even the mountain can't do it." Desmond also expressed his own opinion. "This hammer is lethal enough, but it is not easy to use on a horse. No poor guy can carry you, and this hammer with full armor." Arthur thought about it and agreed. Ordinary horses really can't carry it. Even if Arthur was forced to sit on it, he couldn't run fast. Because if you are not careful, the horse will not be able to bear the force, and will easily fall sideways, kneel down or even break a leg. There are some walking horses with 4 hooves running separately, which should be able to do it. The biggest advantage of this time-sharing 4-wheel drive war horses, that the center of gravity is always on the same line, so it can maintain balance, and is suitable for carrying heavyweight warriors. But I don't know if there are such horses in Westeros. So to be on the safe side, Arthur should also hit a lighter armor-piercing weapon on horseback. According to his preferences in his previous life, he decided to hit a broadsword similar to the King Lang Yanyu sword. This kind of guandeo is actually not the weapon of Guan Yu, the martial saint. It first appeared in the iron-blooded and powerful Song dynasty, and it was a ceremonial tool, not a weapon, that saw blood on the battlefield. But for Arthur, it is just right. For a warrior on horseback, the defense of plate armor is definitely not as good as that of an infantryman, because the weight of the horse must be taken into consideration, and the material must be reduced. Therefore, the requirements for armor penetration are much lower. Moreover, Arthur has always felt that he should change his flag. The golden shield and red horse do not fit his personality. It is just right to change the golden shield to a golden guandeo. The knife means slashing, and the horse means riding. It fits the theme of riding and slashing. While thinking about it, the blacksmith shop of the Master Arthur requested arrived. After communicating, the owner of the blacksmith shop exclaimed, "What? You want to make a hammer as big as a pumpkin? Can you lift it? PS. Please recommend on monthly votes." Chapter 52 200 sets of armor. Watch your attitude. Patrick emphasized coldly, "This is a serious lord." Arthur didn't care about the attitude of the blacksmith shop owner. "Who cares if I can lift it or not? You don't want business coming to your door, right?" Tob Mott, the best blacksmith in King's Landing, had to smile and answer at this moment, "I'll hit it. How about adding some rivets around the hammerhead so that it can increase the lethality?" He still believed that this was a joke made by a few bored noble young masters, or just hitting a toy to see. After all, not many people can lift such a heavy hammer, let alone swing it to hit people. But he still insisted on giving advice, which is his professional ethics. "You watch and hit it. I believe you in terms of technology." Arthur did not object. Then he added, "In addition, I need a set of customized plate armor, the kind that protects the whole body." This Tob's blacksmith shop is located on the top of Visenya Hill. The rent of the shop alone is not a small amount, not to mention the goods sold in the shop. Arthur's own armor can be made here, and for other soldiers, such as jewels, just find a few blacksmith shops. After all, this is the Steel Street, and the most abundant thing is blacksmiths. Plate armor, do you have any special requirements? For example, some patterns or something? Tob asked, because adding patterns can increase the selling price, which is the point of making money. No, practicality is the main thing. Arthur refused straightforwardly. He now has more than 2,800 gold royals. This set of custom armor will cost at least 10 gold royals. If you add some carved patterns, the price can increase a lot. Maybe just this pattern function. He can buy another set of ordinary plate armor. Armor is different from soldiers. If it is well maintained, it can be used for a long time. The cavalry's cloak is for maintenance, not for showing off. The cloak can prevent the cowhide part of the armor from being affected by rain and moisture, so as to extend the service life. As long as there is armor, soldiers can be trained into elites. Elites can form the framework of an army. If the soldiers are all gone, they can be recruited again. The recruited soldiers can be added to the old soldiers and elite soldiers, and a new army will be formed immediately. But if the real elites are all gone, they are really gone. It is too troublesome to train all the new soldiers. The reason why the wars in ancient times did not last long was that the core elites who had been trained off duty were all gone, and the combat effectiveness of the recruited peasant soldiers was not good, so they had to stop fighting. After Arthur and Tob determined the details of the sledgehammer and armor, they proposed their own idea of a golden guardeo. There is no problem with this. Just thicken the blade and lengthen the handle. But how to make the gold color? Copper or gold? Tob raised his doubts. Arthur stared at him. Do I look like someone who is easy to fool? Gold and copper are both soft, and they are just for show. They are not practical. What I want is a good knife that can cut people. Then how do you say to make it golden? Tob was a little surprised. This young nobleman who looked like an inexperienced person actually knew that gold and copper were soft. I don't care. Anyway, you have to make the sword golden and forge it quickly. I won't want it if I miss the tournament. Arthur left a deposit of 3 gold royals, took the shop token, and left with his companions. They had to go to an ordinary blacksmith shop to get some ordinary armor. Ordinary chainmail, lamellar mail, plate mail, etc. for veterans, warriors, and full armor elites. A full set of plate mail costs 8 gold royals, a full set of lamellar mail costs 5 gold royals, and chainmail is not forged. The shop owner, who was wearing a loincloth and bare upper body, said. After visiting several blacksmith shops, Arthur found the cheapest one, but the owner's tone was very aggressive. Compared with Tob's shop, this one was much shabby, and the boss even forged the iron himself. Why not chainmail? Arthur was curious. Chainmail was the cheapest iron armor, and with more than 2,000 gold royals in his hand, there was no problem with the whole few hundred sets. Hundreds of level 3 veterans or level 4 warriors wearing chainmail, coupled with dozens of level 5 elites wearing plate mail, are already a considerable force. With this start, Arthur was able to make a name for himself in the War of the Five Kings. But he failed at the first step. There was no chainmail for sale. The workshops in the Westerlands and the Valley are cheap and of good quality. Chainmail can be bought there. We only accept plate and lamellar armor here. Moreover, the orders have increased greatly in the past 2 days, and it will take a longer time to make them, an apprentice explained. Arthur nodded, indicating that he understood. 200 sets of lamellar armor, can you make it? After thinking for a while, he asked. 200 sets of lamellar armor are enough. There are only 300 or 400 adult males in his territory, and only a little over 200 wear armor on the battlefield. If there is a shortage of armor after the war begins, just take it off the dead. Hearing this, the shop owner immediately became enthusiastic. My lords, please take a seat. He instructed the apprentice beside him to bring half a bench over, and then smiled and said, there is no problem with our shop, but the delivery time is very long. Besides, there are a lot of orders recently due to the tournament. But please rest assured, we can definitely make it. How fast? Arthur asked. The shop owner rolled his eyes. 200 sets. I have to find a dozen more apprentices. 1 month. Almost 1 month can be done. No, it's too slow. Arthur refused flatly. The tournament will only take a few days. If it is finished in 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, Eddard will be injured in the leg by the Lannisters, and in another week or 2, the mountain will come directly. In just this 1 month, the continent of Westeros will be turned upside down. He thought for a moment and said to the shop owner, I want to pick up the goods in 2 weeks, or at most half a month. The shop owner immediately frowned. Master, can't you be a little more lenient? We are just a small shop, and our efficiency is not the same as that of the big workshops in the West. If you can't do it, I will go to other shops to fight. Arthur gave an ultimatum and took out a handful of gold royals from his purse. The shop owner's eyes suddenly lit up. 2 weeks, I will definitely deliver the goods. Master, I will satisfy your requirements, even if I don't eat or drink. He didn't take the business of 200 sets, but his colleagues rushed to take it. Anyway, a shop couldn't produce 200 sets anyway, and it would have to share some of it with itself in the end. In this case, why not take it? Arthur was very satisfied. After discussing with the shop owner, he paid a preliminary deposit of 20 gold royals. After 2 days, they would produce a few sets of samples. After Arthur was satisfied, he would pay the full deposit of 180 gold royals. After taking the token, several people left. They have been shopping for almost a whole morning, so they have to go to those famous pubs to eat something good. P.S. Please recommend and vote for the monthly ticket. Some people in the chapter review said that there are mistakes in the armor. This is my fault. I don't have much knowledge in this area. I have been catching up recently, but there will still be some omissions. If there is anything wrong, please point it out in time. Chapter 53 Tavern. This is it. I remember it as a very good tavern. Desmond pointed to a tavern and said. He led a few people to an alley on the waist of the Visenya Hills near the sea. The stench here almost disappeared due to the sea breeze. It was a good place to eat. The decoration of the store looked good. From the outside, you could see that the tavern had a wide view. Sitting inside, you could see Blackwater Bay and the huge red castle in the distance. Arthur nodded, took the lead and walked in, and sat down at the few remaining empty tables. Boss, what food do you have today? A little girl wearing a beige linen coat and a few freckles on her face ran over and repeatedly introduced the special food of her store to Arthur and others, and emphasized the rice wine brewed by the store. She looked about 14 or 15 years old. Although she looked immature, she was already very skilled in dealing with customers. Then give me a large grilled steak, 2 roasted pigeons, 2 pieces of bread, and a small barrel of rice wine. Let these gentlemen and the gentlemen at that table order by themselves. According to the eating habits of Westeros, which are close to the Renaissance, there are basically no other methods except boiling, roasting, and stewing. And Arthur had no appetite when he saw a large group of ingredients stewed in one pot. Only roasted steaks and roasted lamb chops could make him want to start cooking. Okay. The little girl smiled sweetly, bowed to Arthur, and then turned to record the food ordered by others. After all, she was from King's Landing, and she could bow to the noble customers when ordering a meal. Thinking of the villagers in his territory, who would only smile foolishly when they saw him, Arthur's impression of the little girl suddenly improved. He took out 4 or 5 copper coins and stuffed them into the little girl's hand after she finished recording the food of everyone in the group. The little girl was very smart. When she saw that her parents were not looking at this side, she hurriedly stuffed the copper coins in her hand into her trouser pocket. She winked at Arthur playfully and turned away. It was lunchtime, and the tavern was crowded. Arthur and the others followed the trend and chatted with people from all over the world. Hey, I think King Robert will definitely win the group battle. Not to mention his natural strength. Who dares to fight the king? That's not necessarily true. He's so fat that he can't even wear his plate armor. Can he still fight? Due to Robert's extremely relaxed rule, civilians and wandering knights in the streets and alleys can talk about their king. There are even people with strong competitive spirit. After noting which female worker in the technical academy Robert had slept with, they also ran to be a fellow traveler with the king and ask who is longer, himself or the king. This longer, not only physically, but also in terms of time. In this atmosphere, knights and small nobles relish talking about some of the king's private affairs and get a certain sense of pleasure from it. Arthur was not interested in this. He took the initiative to start a conversation. Who do you think will be the champion of the lance competition? After all, this is what he should care about. The lance champion will receive a reward of 40,000 gold dragons. If he gets this, he will have achieved most of his purpose of coming to King's Landing. If he can get a relationship with a big family in the south, it will be even better to have thousands of sets of armor. Hearing this, the customers in the same room expressed their opinions one after another. It must be Loras, the Knight of Flowers. He killed the Kingslayer with one spear last time and stole the show. Loras Tyrell is the third son of the Duke of Mace, the Guardian of the South. He is named the Knight of Flowers because he likes to put a vest covered with flowers on his mount. It's true. The flowers can't even beat the Hound. How can it beat two fierce men from the Clegane family? The Hound is the younger brother of the Mountain, named Sandor Clegane. After the Mountain was knighted by Prince Rhaegar, the Hound rode his horse to Casterly Rock overnight and swore to serve the Lannisters. This behavior is very similar to a sworn knight, but since his brother the Mountain became a knight, the Hound looked down on this title, so he became a sworn warrior of the Lion's House. Now, the Hound is under the instruction of Queen Cersei to serve as a squire for King Joffrey the Great, who is still a prince. Later, the captain of the King's Guard, Barristan, was fired by Joffrey, and the Hound was recruited into the King's Guard. He also became the first person in the history of Westeros to serve as a King's Guard without being a knight. I'm more optimistic about the Mountain. Speaking of which, the Kingslayer is still capable of fighting. Why don't you mention the pointless Barristan? He's an old master who has been in power for decades without a single defeat. Someone immediately opposed this view. Bullshit. I can count Barristan's failures on one hand, and he's already too old. This just shows that he's experienced. You didn't mention Beric Dondarrion. He's also a master. Don't talk nonsense. Does Beric have any famous achievements? Among the 100 Flowers, the Hound, the Kingslayer, and the Mountain, who can he beat? The most active customers held different opinions and could not convince each other. They argued as if these people were their relatives and friends. But in fact, these top knights in Westeros may never have any intersection with them in their lives. As the food was served, the argument gradually subsided. The aroma of wine and meat showed their presence wantonly throughout the tavern, making Arthur's stomach sing. Fortunately, the little girl served the dishes in time, and Arthur picked up a fat pigeon and started to eat it. "Hey, what are you doing?" the little girl suddenly shouted. Arthur glanced at her and saw that she was standing in front of a drunk young nobleman, and it seemed that the two had physical contact. The owner and his wife of the tavern immediately ran out, first asked the little girl to apologize, and then smiled and said that they would give her a bucket of rice wine for free. But the little girl got angry, shook off her parents' hands, and prepared to run into the kitchen. Arthur ignored this little episode. This is King's Landing. The law and order can be regarded as the best in the entire continent. Even the nobles of the level of Earl from other places dare not bully the civilians at will. Because the civilians in King's Landing can be regarded as the direct subjects of the king, with Robert's face, the nobles will be a little more restrained. Arthur quickly finished eating the pigeon and picked up the steak directly to cook. Seeing Arthur eating so ungentlemanly, Patrick gently reminded him, "Be more elegant. It doesn't match your image of a handsome man." The Lord of the Moulin Rouge ignored him and finished his steak, which was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and then took a sip of rice wine. The rice wine was surprisingly good. He burped comfortably and said to Patrick, "It's because I'm handsome that I don't need to pay attention to my image. People like you who are ugly can only rely on elegant behavior to survive." Just when he was about to eat another pigeon, an accident happened. "Let me go. I don't want to apologize to them. P.S. Please collect, recommend and vote for the monthly ticket." Chapter 54. It's almost done. Arthur turned around and saw that it was the couple from the tavern who had brought their daughter out. They were about to force her head down and make her apologize to the drunk noble. "Look at this face. Let me touch it. It's your honor." The drunk noble couldn't even straighten his tongue, but his hands were very flexible, reaching directly to the girl's shoulders. He even slowly touched down until his chest. The drunk noble's companions also shouted and made a noise, completely disregarding the girl's feelings. The couple from the tavern saw this action and pretended not to see it. They just held their daughter's head down and asked her to apologize to the angry noble. Some of the customers around pretended not to see this and just ate their food. Some followed suit and made a noise as if watching a show. Although the girl's head was held down and her body was attacked, she still refused to give in, gritting her teeth and speaking unclear words. Although Arthur felt that this scene was inconsistent with his values, after all, they were not his subjects, and he had no obligation to care. King Robert was the one who should have taken care of this matter, but it was obvious that the king had spent the night with female workers in the Red Keep, or in a technical academy. My lord, since she has already bowed her head and admitted her mistakes, please forgive us. We will add 2 barrels of fine rice wine as an apology, the tavern owner said in a very humble manner. No, no, no. She must accompany me for one night. One night. The drunk noble raised his index finger in front of the tavern owner. The owner looked at his daughter and felt waves of struggle coming from her neck, but he did not dare to stand up for her. A woman's chastity is not a precious thing. The old Prime Minister Lord Arryn even married a virgin Lyssa. He comforted himself like this. Although according to convention, the gold royal for claiming new land will never be in his hands, it is a good choice if he can avoid this disaster. The tavern owner nodded. Then one night. Then he relaxed his grip and allowed his daughter's head to be raised. I don't agree. I didn't do anything wrong. Why should my parents apologize and ask me to? The little girl's words were obviously crying. At the end, she burst into tears. Seeing this, the drunk noble became even more excited. He hugged the little girl on the spot. It seemed that he couldn't help it. Let me go. The little girl bit the drunk noble's arm fiercely and then flexibly pulled away and ran away. She stumbled all the way and fell down next to Arthur's table. She climbed up several times but couldn't get up. The crying became louder. 7 gods, who will save me? Save this poor man. The drunk noble heard the little girl's crying and followed her staggeringly. I'll let you run. You are mine. Can you escape? He staggered to the little girl, smiled extremely obscenely, and then untied his belt. Although his pants were still hanging, it was obvious that this could not stop his beastly actions. The little girl cried and wailed. She could not count on her parents, and the golden robe that protected them was destined for the nobles. Her wonderful life had just begun, but it was interrupted by this sudden conflict. The drunk noble stretched out his claws towards the little girl, ready to start his wonderful enjoyment. But a hand, like the hardest iron, reached out at the right time and clamped his claws tightly. That's enough. Arthur raised his head and said coldly. The drunk noble was unconscious, but the animal desire drove him to react. He tried hard to pull his right hand out of Arthur's hand, but he couldn't pull it out. So he ordered, hit him. Several of his followers rushed over in response. Where did you come from, you country bumpkin? Do you know who we are? How dare you mess with my master? Let my master go, or you will be in trouble. You are worthy of touching my young master's noble body? Let him go quickly, and kneel down to apologize. Arthur stuffed the half-eaten fat pigeon in his hand into the drunk noble's mouth. I'll sober you up first. Seeing this, the drunk noble's followers rushed even more, and came over to beat Arthur, thinking that this would make Arthur let go of their master. The surrounding customers did not dare to speak before, but now they are very active. Some scolded Arthur's actions, some advised Arthur to let go and not to confront the drunk noble, and some directly fanned the flames and shouted loudly to fight. Desmond was older and more mature, so he whispered, let him go. Less trouble is worse than more trouble. Patrick was younger, so he supported Arthur's move. Yes, that's it. Let him go and use both hands to knock down his followers. Arthur was not an easy man to deal with, so one hand was enough. The 5 followers rushed to the front and were kicked by Arthur. This hateful and pitiful man flew back faster than when he came, like a floating catkin, and hit the wall hard again. After a pause, he slowly fell to the ground. His chest was still rising and falling, and he seemed to be alive, but he was just alive. The second person didn't have time to react, and was also hit by Arthur's big fight. He flew a few steps off the ground, and fell to the ground. Half of his face was swollen immediately, and he kept screaming. The third and fourth people were also kicked and slapped, but because Arthur didn't accumulate enough strength, they suffered much less. The 5th follower was much smarter. Seeing this situation, he pretended to be a passerby and slipped away from another table. Stop, sirs, please stop. We just need to accompany our daughter. Please stop. The couple in the tavern begged, but their words implied that their daughter was an unimportant thing that could be abandoned. The customers in the tavern had different reactions, just like before. Some people advocated giving him face and releasing the drunk nobleman. Some people cheered for Arthur's actions, and some people threatened Arthur and wanted him to receive the punishment he deserved. Arthur glanced at them coldly and shouted, "Shut up." The customers were concerned about Arthur's strength and stopped talking, and the tavern suddenly became quiet. Then, he looked at the drunk nobleman. "Are you sober? Do you know that this is King's Landing, not your small territory?" The drunk noble's eyes were clearer at this time, and after he reacted, his attitude became even more ferocious. "Where did you come from, you little country noble? How dare you stop me from doing good things? Let me go, or I'll break your dog's paws. Her parents have agreed to let her spend the night with me. Why are you pretending to be a good person here?" The little girl sobbed softly, and when Arthur stood up for her, she said intermittently, thank you, master." Arthur ignored the drunk noble's barking and asked the poor little girl, "What is your attitude?" He stood up for the little girl. If she gave in, he would let her go and leave her alone. "It was obviously him who touched me first. Why should I apologize? I don't want to spend the night with him, not at all." The little girl's attitude was very firm. Arthur nodded. "Okay, I get it." Then he turned and stared at the drunk noble and said word by word, "I've said it all. That's enough. You don't understand, right? PS. Please recommend on monthly votes." Chapter 55. Comparison of titles. The drunk noble screamed like a pig being slaughtered, which was really heartbreaking. "Master, spare me. Master, spare me. I know what it means to be done. I understand." The drunk noble immediately begged for mercy after being squeezed by Arthur's iron hand. He felt that the bones of his right hand had been shattered, but this was not enough. "Admit that you touched the girl first and wanted to take the opportunity to blackmail her, and then promise not to cause trouble to this family in the future, and I will let you go." Arthur asked. I did it. I promise not to cause trouble, not to cause trouble." The drunk noble shouted repeatedly, fearing that Arthur would increase his strength. The pain from his right hand was so severe that he would agree to anything. If he was pinched again, even if he was asked to admit that he killed the Mad King Eras II, he would nod and agree without hesitation. Arthur let go and then asked him to repeat what he had just said. The drunk noble was not a fool, and after this whole thing, he was almost sober. So he repeated what he had just said and promised that he would never retaliate in the future. It would be strange if he didn't retaliate, the drunk noble thought in his heart. Arthur saw that the man's attitude was quite sincere, so he waved his hand and let him leave. The man's 4 followers also stumbled over, helped their master up, and helped him sit down in the corner to relax. They couldn't beat him, so they could only endure it silently. Thank you, sir." The little girl also recovered, stood up and thanked Arthur repeatedly. Although Arthur also enjoyed others' thanks, he pretended to be calm and said, "It's okay, it's just a small effort." Seeing that the situation here had eased, the tavern owner and his wife came over carefully, first knelt down to apologize to the drunk noble, and then severely scolded their daughter, causing the latter to run to the back kitchen crying again, and then walked to Arthur's table. "Thank you for your help. You don't have to pay for today's expenses," they said in a low voice, fearing that the drunk noble would hear and vent his anger on them again. Arthur was not very satisfied with the couple's attitude. He was a man of integrity. He stood up for the girl because he couldn't stand this ruffian noble, not for a free lunch. There were many things that could be easily solved if one person stood up and said that's enough. No need for that. Arthur glanced at the price written on the wall, took out 3 silver deer, and paid for the meal in advance. Along the way, the eldest son Patrick, who was traveling with him, had no intention of paying. Desmond was not only a seasoned man, but also the coach of Riverrun, the family castle of the Hegian lord. He was always a freeloader wherever he went. Only Arthur, who couldn't stand it, paid every time. It was not Arthur's character to bully these civilians who lived on selling food. Although the tavern owner said no, he still accepted it without even giving the change. The group quickly finished eating and prepared to get up and leave. "Why, you want to slip away after causing trouble in King's Landing?" Several gold robes walked into the tavern, and the leading captain shouted. The gold robes were the garrison troops of King's Landing, and they were also responsible for maintaining law and order. Do you think we are here to eat for free? Isn't that right? Arthur complained in his heart. Seeing this, most of the tavern customers didn't even pay and ran away. The remaining 7 or 8 people were also nobles, waiting to watch the fun. The 5th follower of the drunk noble who had escaped earlier followed the golden robe in, looked at Arthur with a very smug look, and said tauntingly, "You are very good at fighting, don't you try to beat us in front of these gentlemen." The drunk noble saw the golden robe coming, and immediately became confident. He stood up and shouted, "Just a wild man who came from nowhere dared to hit me. The master, golden robe, capture them for me." The captain of the golden robe saw that the victim and the victim were there, and sneered, "This is unfortunate, just capture them." Then he turned his head, and looked at the drunk noble flatteringly, "My lord, I'm sorry that I can't protect you." The following golden robes received the order, and came over to capture Arthur and the others. Arthur smiled helplessly, and prepared to fight with fists. The gold robes of these veterans were no match for him. At this moment, Patrick stopped him, and turned to the gold robes. "Open your eyes, and see what my family emblem is," he said, shaking his collar to make the purple-bottomed silver eagle emblem of Hejiang City on his collar more conspicuous. The gold-robed soldiers may not recognize this emblem, but they also know that this is a noble lord, not something that a group of big-headed soldiers like them can touch. "Didn't you say these people are civilians?" The captain opened his eyes wide and stared fiercely at the entourage who brought them here. Because of this person's words, he determined that Arthur and his group were civilians from the beginning. Even after coming in and seeing that their leaders were dressed more luxuriously, he thought they were just businessmen. Unexpectedly, this group of people were also nobles. The entourage thought, if 2 groups of nobles were fighting, I'm afraid you wouldn't show up, even if someone was killed. But he had to give a proper answer, so he replied, "I didn't see it." The captain cried out that he was unlucky. He thought he could help a noble lord and establish a relationship, but he didn't expect that they were all lords. And the party that beat people seemed to be from the Earl's family of Hejiang City. This was difficult to deal with. On the left, there was a lord, and on the other hand, there was also a lord. Whoever was right would offend the other party. In desperation, he first made a round. I was wondering what kind of person dared to take action in King's Landing. It turned out to be the lord of the Earl's family of Hejiang City. The drunken noble saw the change in the attitude of the captain of the gold robe, and felt something was wrong, so he whispered to a follower who could still move beside him, "Go and call my cousin, and ask him to bring more people quickly. If it's too late, we will suffer a great loss." The follower understood, and while everyone's eyes were focused on the captain of the gold robe, he slipped away silently. The drunken noble saw that he had a backup plan, and his confidence rose again. So he said in a tough manner, "Why, you golden robes don't want to be fair? Besides, I want the virginity of that woman. I don't care which earl's son you are." The captain of the golden robes was in a difficult situation. When he was hesitant, he suddenly remembered the experience given by his predecessors and immediately had a solution. "This matter is very obvious. No one from our King's Landing garrison was present, and you all have your own opinions. I don't know how long it will take to argue. How about this? You show your titles and identities. Whoever has a higher title and status is right. The title represents the strength of the family, and the identity represents the status of each person in the family. It is the fairest to deal with it this way." Seeing that the family emblem of the drunk noble was not from a big family, Patrick said confidently, "You golden robes are still reasonable. I'm Patrick Mallister, the first heir to the Earl of Seaborder City. Do you dare to show your identity?" He raised his chin and looked at the drunk noble proudly. Arthur also thought this method was good, so he stopped trying to stand out and just sat on a bench to watch the fun. He even had time to take a sip of rice wine. P.S. Please give me a recommendation and monthly vote. Chapter 56 The Value of the Marquis Family. Although the drunk nobleman was not very confident at this time, he became arrogant again when he thought of his cousin Cleus Free. Cleus Free is the eldest son of Emmon Free, and Emmon Free is the second son of Walder Free, the head of the twins. In other words, His cousin is the son of the second son of the Marquis Free. Originally, this relationship was not very reliable, but his cousin had a very unusual relationship. Cleus is the cousin of Queen Cersei, Kingslayer Jaime of the King's Good, Little Devil and others. Because Cleus' mother is Jenna Lannister, the sister of Duke Tywin. Of course, she should be called Jenna Free now. His cousin's cousin is the Queen, and he is also the cousin of the Queen. With this relationship, he feels that he should walk sideways in King's Landing. Of course, it is a bit disadvantageous to show his title and identity at this time. Because he is just the heir of a small viscount, and has no power in King's Landing. At least he had to wait until his cousin came to support him, so that he could completely overwhelm this group of people. So he pretended to be confused, suddenly covered his head, and groaned, "Ouch, this bastard hit my head, my noble head." Seeing this situation, the captain also knew how to deal with it. The nobleman who was beaten was obviously a minor nobleman. His status could not be compared with the first heir of Hejiang City, so he pretended to be crazy and stupid. Both parties are nobles, and they cannot hurt their face too much. If the Hejiang City party who beat people does not pursue it, this matter will be over. It seems that Sir Patrick is right. If you have no questions, you can leave. The captain changed the object of flattery. His idea was to let the people of Hejiang City go first, and then let go of the nobleman who was beaten. In this way, neither side would be offended. But things did not go as planned. Patrick nodded, and was about to turn around and ask Arthur to leave, but he saw his companion motioning him to sit down and watch the show. The Lord of the Moulin Rouge looked at the captain of the gold robes and said, "Didn't you want to take us down as soon as we entered the door? Now we are in the right. I want to see if you can take down those who are not in the right." Arthur made up his mind to watch the fun. Let's see how this gold robe who can judge right and wrong with his title will deal with the drunk nobles. When Patrick heard this, he also felt that he should vent his anger. So he followed Arthur's example and sat on the bench leaning against the table with his elbows on the table ready to watch the show. Seeing that his side had the upper hand, Desmond did not leave and sat down. The captain suddenly felt a headache. He had just judged that the people of Sea Frontier City were in the right, so he should arrest the party that was not in the right and making trouble. But the problem was that the party he judged to be in the wrong was the one who was beaten. And it was a nobleman he dared not offend. He gritted his teeth, smiled, and walked up to Patrick and said, "Sir, please show mercy and let these people go. They were beaten up, and they are also pitiful people." Arthur sneered, "Those who were beaten are pitiful people, so isn't the little girl who was harassed by him a pitiful person?" Patrick thought of Arthur's righteous behavior and felt proud, so he said, "Yes, the little girl is also pitiful. We are right, you can't let him go." "You are right, can't you be more lenient?" "No, why should we be more lenient when we are right?" Arthur refused flatly. The captain felt that he was overwhelmed. The people over there didn't dare to arrest, and the people here were not forgiving. He felt that the world was about to collapse. At this moment, a voice came. "You are from Hejiang City, right? You are quite arrogant. You dare to bully my cousin." A group of people walked in, hugging a nobleman in his 30s with mediocre features. The captain of the noble gold cloaks knew that it was Cleus Free, the notorious man in King's Landing, and the cousin of Queen Cersei. He immediately made a judgment and trotted to the queen's cousin. "Lord Cleus, I was just about to stand up for your cousin, but these people are so tough." "Okay, I get it." Cleus waved his hand in a pretentious manner and asked the captain of the gold cloaks to withdraw. Then he looked at Arthur and the others who were sitting carelessly at the table. "Tell me, what do you mean by taking the initiative to hit my cousin?" Arthur instantly had a clear understanding of this man's shamelessness. This person who took the initiative to hit someone, it was not Arthur and the others who were right. "Cousin, the drunk noble saw that his backer had come, and his headache was gone. He jumped up and slid to his cousin and started to complain." Cleus pretended to listen to his cousin, but his eyes were wandering around Patrick, thinking that he could extort a large sum of money this time. So he pretended to be righteous and said, "In the matter of my cousin, you not only took the initiative to beat him, but also bullied a drunk nobleman. You are really despicable and shameless. Tell me, how do you want to solve it? Let the gold cloaks catch him, and we can solve it." This was Arthur's answer. Patrick expressed his agreement with his companions with laughter. You are simply lawless. If you don't compensate me and my cousin with 1,000 gold royals, you can't leave. Clea wanted to ask them to compensate him with 1,000 gold royals, but when the word came to his mouth, he realized that his cousin was the victim, so he changed his words. Not only that, I want that woman too. Clea's cousin shouted at the right time. No money, but I have fists. If you have the courage, come and get them. How dare you? Fight me. Clea saw that this group of people didn't care about his threats at all, and he was immediately furious. I want to show you what the gold content of the Marquis family is. He asked the 20 attendants around him to rush up and teach this group of people a lesson, and at the same time, instructed several gold cloaks to go up and fight. The captain of the Golden Robe suddenly felt that he was unlucky to encounter such a scene today. He should stop the fight now, but he didn't dare to offend the queen's cousin, so he walked forward slowly, praying that Krea's people would hit the people of Heijiang City first. In this way, they didn't have to fight and took a neutral attitude. Seeing this situation, several customers watching around also advised Arthur and his friends to bow their heads. Paying a few gold royals is a small matter, but offending the queen's cousin is a big matter. Oh, don't be so stubborn. There are more than 20 of them, and you are only 5 or 6. You can't beat them. Young people should not be too arrogant. You should bow your heads when you should. Arthur glanced at the people watching the fun and shook his head with a smile. A frog in the well is not worth getting angry. I will let you know the value of the Marquis family now, and that is to be beaten by me. He stood up first, raised his fist and hit the first person. Patrick followed, and he now thought Arthur was unbelievably handsome. Desmond was a mature man. He realized that Clea was trying to extort money, so he didn't rush up to him immediately. Instead, he repeatedly advised Arthur not to do it. But the situation in front of him was beyond his expectations. P.S. Please recommend and vote for me. Chapter 57 I Can Fight Too. Desmond thought he knew Arthur's fighting ability, but he was still deeply shocked by the scene he saw. The tables, chairs, and benches in the tavern were affected by the fight and were in a mess. Arthur, who was in the center of the fight, hit one small piece of trash with one punch. In a few breaths, all the 20 people brought by Clea fell to the ground, rolling over and screaming. Desmond even saw a few followers who were not hit by the punches. Seeing that the situation was not right, they fell to the ground and groaned. 7 gods. Patrick exclaimed loudly, I didn't even have time to make a move. He also stood up to meet the enemy, thinking that he could show off his skills in front of Arthur, but he didn't even touch the enemy's body. There were not many people with weapons on the opposite side, most of them were gangsters, hooligans, etc. The few who had swords were knocked down by Arthur in the first time. There was even a sword with a fist mark on the blade of the sword. Patrick looked at the fist mark and marveled. Arthur felt his companion's eyes on him, so he shook his hands and said with a smile, it hurts. In fact, he didn't feel much pain. It might be because of his iron bone skill. As long as there was no bloody collision, the pain was greatly reduced. After hitting the people on the ground a few times to ensure that they would not suddenly attack from behind, Arthur looked at the several golden robes who were slowly walking over. The captain in the lead suddenly felt lucky that he moved slowly, otherwise he and his subordinates would be lying on the ground at this moment. This person is too strong. We are here to persuade and stop the fight. The captain hurriedly shook his hands and denied that he was in the same group with Cleus. Then he pretended to be righteous and said, Sir Cleus, your act of ordering the beating is not in accordance with King Robert's law. I suggest you go to the throne room of the Red Castle and confess your crime to the king or the prime minister. The meaning of his words was to let Cleus run quickly. Otherwise, he might be beaten like his drunken cousin. He turned his head and saw Cleus with a dull look in his eyes and a wide mouth, as if he had seen a White Walker. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Cleus kept muttering, even if it's the mountain, there's no way he could defeat so many people so quickly. How can the mountain compare to me? Arthur boasted, then strode forward and walked to Cleus and his cousin. The two were so shocked by Arthur's bravery that they didn't even think of running away. In fact, their legs had already begun to tremble, but they didn't react because of fear. Arthur grabbed one of them by the neck with one hand and threw his head on the table next to him. Sir, don't fight anymore. This is the Queen's cousin. A spectator reminded. That's right, Cersei's cousin is not someone you, a country noble, can fight. Get away quickly, after you get the upper hand. Don't be arrested by the gold cloaks. Arthur glared at the chattering spectators fiercely. He is the king of the world, and I can beat him if he falls into my hands. Not to mention that he is just a relative of the Queen. Well said, beat them. Patrick cheered for his idol on the side. Yes, from this moment on, he decided to change his idol from Arthur Dayne, the sword of the god, to Arthur Braykin. The sword of the god only exists in legends, but Braykin is a record of victory that can be seen with one's own eyes. Arthur turned his head and ignored the spectators. First, let's talk about you. If you hadn't been so naughty that you touched that girl and then acted so coquettishly that I couldn't bear it, would I have been able to punish you? Arthur pressed Cleo's cousin's head on the table and banged it hard for more than 10 times. He stopped only when he felt that he had let out a breath. Besides, you came up and blackmailed me for 1,000 gold royals. Do you think I can't hear it? If I don't teach you a lesson, do you think I'm easy to bully? Arthur hated blackmailers the most. After giving Cleo and his cousin the same treatment, he let them go. The two men's foreheads were already bleeding, and after being released, they sat on the ground. They didn't dare to leave, and they couldn't leave, because their legs were shaking with fear and they couldn't stand up. The captain of the Gold Cloaks looked at this scene awkwardly. According to his duty, he should stop it, but he didn't dare to go up to him too close. After seeing the man's fighting power, while he was embarrassed, he caught a glimpse of his superiors with a large group of gold cloaks outside the tavern. What should we do next? Patrick asked excitedly. Of course, we should leave. Arthur waved his hand, signaling his companions to run away, but they were blocked by more gold cloaks who came in front of them. You dare to hit people in King's Landing. You are so brave. The leader shouted loudly at first to establish his majesty. Then he saw the purple-bottomed silver eagle embroidery on Patrick's collar. Oh, it turns out to be the Lord of Sea Border City. Are you not injured? He immediately became amiable. Patrick was still young and didn't know how to deal with it, so he raised his proud chin and remained silent. Desmond was mature and immediately went up to explain. The leading golden cloak saw this scene and also caught a glimpse of the Queen's cousin Cleus lying on the ground. When he saw the embarrassed look of his captain, he immediately understood the general situation. It seemed that two groups of nobles were fighting, and his subordinates did not dare to intervene. He rolled his eyes and immediately had a way to deal with it. Let King Robert make the decision. Unlike the madness of the late King Aerys II, King Robert was an extremely peaceful ruler. Even the noble families who were enemies with him in the War of the Usurper could retain their territories, as long as they swore to submit to him. At most, they would be reduced in fiefdom and downgraded in rank. This was also the reason why he quickly established a unified kingdom in the Seven Kingdoms. The leading Golden Cloak first made a round. Your subordinates are really good at fighting. They actually defeated opponents who were several times their own, he said to Patrick, but he didn't realize that Arthur was the core of this group of people. This matter has caused a big uproar. I dare not make a judgment. Why don't we move to the Red Castle and go to the throne room to let the king make the judgment? Although he spoke in a tone of suggestion, he had already ordered his men to help up the people who fell to the ground, arrested the couple in the tavern and the little girl, and surrounded Arthur and others. It seems that not going to the Red Castle is not an option. Patrick looked at Arthur, and after getting the consent of his idol, he nodded, indicating that he agreed to go to the Red Castle to listen to the king's judgment. The group went to the throne room. The idle people, wandering warriors, and small nobles who heard the news gradually joined in. When they arrived at the gate of the Red Castle, hundreds of people gathered. The throne room is a hall where the symbol of the King of Westeros, the Iron Throne, is located. Because it is a place where the king listens to the complaints of the people and announces a judgment, the throne room sometimes allows civilians to enter. So the Golden Cloaks, Arthur and other victims and hundreds of civilian nobles who were watching rushed in together. P.S. Please recommend on monthly tickets. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. we cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 58 Beat Me Again. 7 Hells. King Robert exclaimed loudly. If there is no sufficient reason, I will definitely kiss your ass with my boots. He sat on the bed in dishevel, staring at the Golden Cloak. The Golden Cloak, who reported the news to the king, did not look away, pretending not to see the several women behind the king, and loudly reported to Robert that there were 2 groups of nobles fighting. It's Cleus, that stupid guy again. Are the Lannisters so stubborn? Robert shouted loudly, his face full of displeasure. He may have forgotten that Cleus is only a cousin of the Lannister family and does not have the same surname as the Queen's family. In the Golden Cloak's narration, he only grasped the key information of the Queen's cousin and then naturally thought that this was another bad thing done by the Lannisters. Although he was very unhappy that his intimate process with several women was interrupted, he quickly put on his clothes and prepared to go to the throne room to deal with this dispute. Robert even made up his mind that if Cleus, the Queen's cousin, was not right at all, he would make the Lannister relatives pay the price. The price of interrupting his pleasure and having the Kingslayer James standing outside the door to listen to his shouts. When King Robert arrived at the throne room with the king's guard and other servants, a large group of people had already gathered inside, chattering about the matter. I think the people of Sealand are right. Bullshit, it's just a commoner being bullied, but the one being beaten is a noble, and one of them is the Queen's cousin. How can Sealand be right? Aren't you also a commoner? Why are you speaking for the nobles? It's not a question of speaking for someone, it's a universal rule. Most of the nobles also believed that the people of Sealand were not right. After all, what Arthur and his men did violated the interests of most nobles. Robert walked into the throne room from the back and nodded to the king's hand. Lord Eddard, who had already arrived and sat down, but stood up after seeing him. Then he walked up the steps and sat on the huge iron sword-made chair. The touch from his but was so uncomfortable that it made Robert's mood even worse. Quiet, he shouted. Perhaps because he was born a warrior, Robert's voice was unusually loud. After this shout, nearly 1,000 people inside and outside the throne room immediately shut up, and the surroundings became quiet. The one who was beaten should tell the story first. Robert naturally thought that Cleus was the one who beat others, so he let the one who was beaten tell the story first. This way, he could avoid preconceived ideas. But when he saw Cleus, with blood on his forehead, stand up and tell how he was beaten, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Then his mood became a little happier. Seeing the Lannisters suffer a setback can make the king simply happy. 7 layers of hell, I know I have to pay. After listening to Cleus's story, Robert let out a loud sigh. It's not that I don't want to pay, it's just that she soiled my clothes first, so her parents wanted her to spend the night with me. Cleo's cousin quietly defended. In Cleo and his cousin's story, the little girl soiled his clothes, so her parents thought of paying him back by spending the night with him. As for the subsequent fight, it was Arthur's side who beat them up because they were angry and embarrassed, and they were not prepared at all. If we were fully prepared, we could win, Cleo said with a lack of confidence. Then it's still not paying, right? When I was young, I knew I had to pay a gold royal. Robert looked at this person with disgust and then asked the person who beat him to come out to defend himself. Arthur and his friends looked left and right and pushed out the mature Desmond. This is the situation. Mr. Arthur beat him up for justice. As for the subsequent conflict, it was entirely because Sir Cleo wanted to blackmail us, and he brought it upon himself. Desmond overturned Cleo's cousin's lie very concisely and told the reason for the incident. I also want to believe you, Sir Master of Reveron. Robert glanced at Arthur, who was mentioned, but it's hard for me to believe that he defeated 20 people by himself. In Robert's eyes, Arthur was just an ordinary little nobleman with a tall and thin figure and a handsome face. How could he defeat 20 people by himself in a few breaths, and with bare hands? Although he also wanted to make Lannister's relatives suffer. Your Majesty, you still have witnesses to call. Desmond pointed at the couple in the tavern. Robert nodded and let the 3 people speak. Cleus stared at the couple in the tavern obscurely, which made the latter's expression change. Under the gaze of the audience, the couple in the tavern chose their words and spoke hesitantly for a long time, and they actually matched Cleus's statement. You see, even the statement of the person in your mouth is inconsistent with your statement. Robert tried hard to defend Desmond's words. In fact, the statements of the couple in the tavern and Desmond were completely opposite. Arthur suddenly spoke up at this time. Why don't you think about the reason? He took a few steps forward and walked to a place where everyone could see. It is precisely because of our rescue that we will definitely not retaliate against the couple in the tavern, and Cleus, who suffered a loss, will come back for revenge. So it is easy to understand who the couple is talking to. You should use honorifics for His Majesty the King. Captain Barristan of the King's Guard reminded Arthur. It's okay. Robert, wearing the crown, waved his hand. What the young man said makes sense, but you still can't prove your statement. After all, it is difficult for me to believe that you defeated 20 people by yourself. There is still one person who hasn't spoken. Arthur looked at the little girl, believing that she should have the truth in her mouth. Although the little girl still had 2 lines of tears on her face, she was not afraid of the stage at all. She stood up and told how Arthur saved her from the clutches of the devil, and then how he fought back against Cleus righteously. I'm at a loss. Robert looked at his good brother, Duke Eddard. What do you think? It sounds like Mr. Arthur's plan is more reasonable, but I can't believe that one person could beat down 20 people in a blink of an eye. Although Duke Eddard hated his cousin Cleus's behavior, he also doubted the words of Arthur and Desmond. As the Guardian of the North, he has always believed in the old gods, but he firmly opposed the Lord's right to the first night. For this reason, he even issued an order to let the northern nobles abolish this right. That's easy. The parties are all here. Let them fight again. Robert's brother, Duke Renly of Storm's End, came at some point and suggested with a chuckle. Great. Arthur also agreed. He also wanted to beat up Cleus and others again. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 59, Merentran. Can't you be more serious? The king glared at his younger brother. Is it right to let a group of people who have been beaten get beaten again? Lord Renly smiled elegantly at his elder brother and said nothing more. Loras Tyrrell, the Knight of Flowers, followed behind Renly and was amused by the two's words. After glancing at the two coldly, Robert turned to Arthur and others in front of the Iron Throne. You all have your own opinions, and I can't tell who is right or wrong. Let's put it this way, Sir Arthur, as long as you show your strength to defeat these 20 people, I will believe you. Robert felt that this was the greatest privilege he could give. First of all, I'm not a knight, I'm a small noble. Arthur pointed out a mistake in Robert's words. Sir is a title for knights who have been granted titles, and it does not apply to nobles with fiefs. Secondly, I'm very happy to use my own strength to expose the lies of Cleus and his followers. Arthur now dislikes Cleus and others. Just now, he was as cowardly as a grandson in the tavern, and now he is full of lies, without blushing or beating his heart. Maybe this is the basic cultivation of nobles. If possible, Arthur really wants to deal with Cleus and his cousin again. You are alone, and have not put on armor yet. How to arrange it? Robert asked. Whatever, my strength is here. Just do what Lord Renly said, and fight them again. Alas. Robert looked at Arthur helplessly, then let one of my King's Guard take off his armor and fight you. If it's a draw, I will consider what you said to be true. The King's Guard is a knight who swears to protect the king for life. The oath is almost exactly the same as the oath of the Night's Watch on the wall. He will never marry, give up land, or have children in his life. The biggest difference between the Night's Watch and the King's Guard is that the King's Guard is a group of 7 knights who have become famous in Westeros. The king announced his idea, but he did not expect that his words would cause discussion among the onlookers and nobles. Sure enough, they only helped their own people. Isn't this too bullying? What Mr. Arthur did should be right, but he just exaggerated it a little. Look at the king. He is biased towards the relative of the Lannister family, who made his queen a lion. How can this young man tie with the King's Guard? The troublemaker Lord Renly made a new proposal at this time. Brother, I think this is very unfair to Arthur. Everyone knows the strength of the King's Guard. Your method is to judge that Arthur and Desmond and others have lied. I also think it is unfair. Letting a King's Guard fight Mr. Arthur is really bullying. The new Prime Minister Lord Eddard also expressed his point of view. Robert also felt that his previous proposal was too exaggerated. An unknown young man would definitely not be able to beat a Kingsguard in his prime. Even the old ones, such as Barristan, may not be able to tie. Young man, I'd better change people to fight with you. Sterling, you pick a strong captain to fight Mr. Arthur. Janis Sterling was the commander of the Gold Cloaks. After hearing the king's order, he turned around and picked the weakest captain from behind him. He could still understand King Robert's intention. Well, that's not important. Arthur refused. My strength is here, and it's nothing to fight with a Kingsguard. The Lord of the Red Mill was just about to try his skills. He estimated that he might be second only to the top masters of the continent like Barristan or people like the Mountain who are naturally strong. Among the Kingsguard, except Barristan, the rest are only at the level of the first-class knights in Westeros. Even if Arthur's skills are not good enough, his strength is enough to make up for this shortcoming. You know, his current strength is 17 points, which is only 3 points away from the upper limit of 20 for normal humans. The onlookers and nobles couldn't understand what Arthur said. Don't be so stubborn, young man. You can't beat the Kingsguard. Let's just follow the king's advice. Let him fight with a white robe and lose face in front of so many bigwigs. Robert was also dissatisfied with Arthur's rejection of his second proposal. The young man's evaluation in his heart was lowered a lot. Since you insist, let a Kingsguard fight you. Meryn Trant, take off your armor and fight this gentleman a few times. Just don't bleed. A Kingsguard standing on the steps of the Iron Throne responded, turned around and bowed slightly to the king, then left through the back door to take off his armor. Which kind person can lend me a greatsword? The heavier the better, Arthur asked. His hammer and greatsword New Moon were still in the inn halfway up the mountain in Visalia, and he just didn't have a weapon at hand. Hearing this, the crowd laughed. After all this trouble, you don't even have a sword. Why are you still pretending? You want to challenge the Kingsguard without a sword? Because the second proposal was rejected, King Robert didn't want to help Arthur. The scene suddenly became awkward. How about this? I'll lend this sword of mine, Ice, to this gentleman. Lord Eddard said. Ice is a Valyrian two-handed greatsword passed down from the Stark family, and it may also be the most famous Valyrian steel sword. According to the original book, after Eddard was beheaded by King Joffrey, this sword fell into Tywin's hands and was melted and forged into 2.5 swords, Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. Arthur's action of standing up for an unrelated little girl was very much in line with the new Prime Minister's wishes, and he asked his captain of the guard, Jory, to deliver his sword. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. People of justice will always attract each other. Arthur nodded to Eddard to express his gratitude, then took the Valyrian steel sword, waved it, and felt that the weight and length were just right for him. If there is a chance, after Eddard Stark was beheaded by Joffrey, help the Wolf family keep this sword of steel. After all, it is a family heirloom, and it cannot be recast by the old lion Tywin in vain. Soon, Meryn Trant also took off his armor and changed into grey pants and a linen shirt. You two just need to fight a few moves to prove that Desmond and Arthur did not lie about defeating these 20 people. Don't cause bloodshed. The captain of the Kingsguard, Barristan, emphasized the rules of the fight again. A large group of golden cloaks surrounded the onlookers and circled a fighting field. The two nodded, walked into the circle, and began to observe their opponents. Ed, who do you think is right? Robert turned sideways and asked with his head tilted. Although I hope Arthur wins, it is obvious that Ser Trant has a greater chance of winning. Duke Eddard gave his opinion. As soon as the voice fell, in the eyes of nearly 1,000 people in the audience, the two began to fight. P.S. Please give me recommendation votes and monthly votes. Chapter 60. A battle shocks everyone. You will regret rejecting the king's second proposal. When the two men started to wrestle, Meryn Trant suddenly said this. I will never regret it. Arthur was still holding back, but he didn't want to fall behind. Humph. Meryn Trant sneered and began to exert his strength, preparing to block Arthur and end this farce with a sword. It was really embarrassing for the king to choose him to deal with such an unknown young man. He shouted and exerted force from his feet, legs, waist, and abdomen, arms and other parts at the same time, ready to make a contribution in one fell swoop. Good job, Ser Trant, do him. Cleus encouraged the king's good. Merentrant has a special relationship with the Lannisters, so Cleus naturally regards him as one of his own. Young man, surrender if you can't hold on, Barristan reminded. He was worried about Arthur, fearing that Sertrand would do something bad and hit him hard. The onlookers were chattering and watching the performance of the two. The biggest advantage of being a member of the King's Landing crowd is that you can see all kinds of big scenes. The love, hatred, and power games of the nobles were just performances in their eyes. No matter who won or lost, they were the most loyal audience and spectators. King Robert, Eddard and other princes and ministers watched the two wrestling. Although they knew that Arthur's defeat was only a matter of time, it was surprising that they had persisted for so long. The two looked the same height, but Merentrant was a whole circle stronger, and it was self-evident who was stronger. After Arthur felt the limit of Merentrant's strength, he suddenly exerted his strength and blocked him in one fell swoop. Then, without giving his opponent a chance to react, he swung the ice and chopped at the king's good who had taken off his white armor, slashing several times in a row. Merentrant naturally blocked it with his sword. The sound of metal and stone hitting each other immediately covered the whispering in the throne room. How is this possible? Robert was so shocked that his eyes almost popped out. It is common sense that body shape determines strength. Anyone with great strength is always related to a strong body. Arthur looked a little thin, but he was able to suppress Merentrant in strength. He even suppressed the king's good to the point where he could only raise his sword to block, but could not fight back at all. Lord Eddard was also surprised by what he saw and was speechless. Just now he thought that Arthur's words about defeating 20 people were exaggerated, but now it seems that this is very likely true. Loris, the Knight of Flowers, was also stunned by Arthur's performance. This is quite strong. Lord Renly of Storm's End could not understand the specific combat power of the two people on the field, but he was also very clear that Arthur had the upper hand. He asked his close friend, "How strong is he?" "In terms of strength, I'm far from being a match for this Arthur," Loris answered while staring at the situation on the field without blinking. The captain of the King's Good, the fearless Barristan, suddenly felt that his previous worries were a bit unnecessary. Judging from the performance of this young man, it should be his nominal brother Merentrant who could not hold on, and some of the onlookers changed their views. This Arthur is so strong. It seems that what he said about one man defeating 20 people is true. Some people disagreed, and even after being slapped in the face, they still insisted on their previous views. It was obviously because Sertrand was humble enough for him that he got the chance. That's right, Merentrant is a king's good, the king's personal guard. There were many people who held such views. In their unbelievable eyes, Arthur cut off Merentrant's sword with a sword and ended the fight. Merentrant stared at the half-broken sword in his hand, and then glanced at the half on the ground, with mixed feelings in his heart. Just now, he thought he could end this competition neatly, and then prove his strength in the white robes in front of the people and courtiers. But he didn't expect to be defeated by this young man's big sword. Although the opponent had the blessing of the Valyrian steel sword, he still lost. If it was spread out, he would lose face. Cleus and his cousin looked dazed. They thought that Arthur could never beat a king's good. Unexpectedly, the ruthless reality broke their psychological defenses in the blink of an eye. What's worse is that Merentrant lost, and they might be punished by the king. Arthur looked at his silent opponent, and then looked around at the stunned onlookers. After finding a sense of pleasure and spiritual satisfaction from their shocked faces, he turned to the Iron Throne. "Excuse me, have I proved my strength?" He opened his arms and smiled at Robert, who was a little stunned. "Oh, yes, that's right." Robert was stunned for a moment before answering. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that their king was surprised by this result, but considering that everyone's reaction was similar, no one cared about it. Mr. Arthur has the strength to defeat these 20 hooligans. This is a fact that everyone can see. Therefore, I believe that Cleus and his cousin deceived their king for something. Robert was furious at the Queen's cousin, and then ordered them not to retaliate against the tavern couple and let them go. Considering that they didn't do much evil, but were beaten up by Arthur, this ending was actually acceptable. As for the rest, Robert was too lazy to deal with it. He left everyone and patted his butt and slipped away. There were still a few beauties in the room waiting for him to visit. When Barristan and other king's goods followed the king out, most of them looked at Arthur carefully before leaving. It seemed that they were confirming that it was really this tall and thin handsome guy who defeated Meryn Trant. Arthur didn't care about these. He personally handed the ice back to the Prime Minister, Duke Eddard, who was walking down the stairs. This big sword is very sharp, worthy of being a vast steel sword. After Eddard took the sword, he hung it around his waist. I'm sorry for questioning you before. From the previous and subsequent situations, you are an upright, kind, strong and brave person. Now the Prime Minister spoke more politely. As the adopted son of the Eagle House of Arryn, whose family language is high as glory, he actually has a bit of moral cleanliness. He has a good impression of people like Arthur who help him. I just did what a normal person should do. After all, anyone who saw the situation at that time would say that it was enough. Ed nodded seriously, expressing his approval of Arthur's statement. You can leave now. After such a commotion, I think the Queen's cousin will definitely not dare to bother you again. Arthur smiled and said goodbye. He wished that Clear and his cousin would come to his house and let him beat them up again. As for the onlookers, they gradually walked out after the king slipped away, and now most of them have left. Sir, can I follow you? Just as Arthur and Patrick and others were walking out, a voice came. P.S. Please recommend and vote for the monthly ticket. Some people say that my writing is watery. I promise that I will not write watery articles in the future and speed up the advancement of the plot. Chapter 61. An accountant is in hand. Arthur turned around and found that it was the daughter of the couple in the tavern. I can be your maid. I can do needlework and keep accounts. Seeing him looking at her, the little girl hurriedly promoted herself. Look, I sewed all my clothes myself. Arthur glanced around and found that the couple in the tavern had left. It seemed that they didn't care much about their daughter. But I don't need a maid, Arthur replied. Just kidding. They were all big men, and it was really inappropriate to take a little girl back. The little girl was so anxious that she almost cried. You are an upright person. Just take me in. Otherwise I will be sold to a technical college by them. Arthur looked at this little girl who looked like a junior high school student in her previous life. If he left her, she might really be sold by her parents. And then she would live a life that was not human. Thinking of this, the Lord of the Moulin Rouge felt a little uncomfortable. Then come with me. What's your name? Haley, my lord. Thank you, thank you. May the seven gods bless you for life. The little girl hurriedly thanked him. Arthur turned around and walked outside and caught a glimpse of Patrick's smirk. So you like this? The Lord of Haejiang City felt that he had discovered something incredible. Don't talk nonsense. Arthur denied it at the first time. I only like beautiful ones. Arthur's standard for choosing a spouse is not high long legs, thin waist, firm chest, hips, fair skin and beautiful appearance are all fine. As for hairstyle, he can accept big waves, princess cuts, ponytails, waist-length hair, etc. It doesn't matter whether it's long, short, curly or straight, as long as it's a beautiful girl or sister. Lord Arthur is not picky. As for this Haley, take her back to be a tailor, accountant or something. Thinking of accounting, Arthur felt that he should find someone to manage money full-time to calculate and manage the expenses and income of his entire territory. Haley can be observed and cultivated. Arthur's own subordinate, the butler Amber, was loyal but actually mediocre in ability. Jules was not to be mentioned. He was just an old soldier who had rich experience in surviving without money, but he was not very useful. Arthur had to be careful that he would run away with the money. Most of the other subordinates were farmers who grew up in the Riverlands. They had not received any education and had not seen the prosperity of big towns such as King's Landing. It would be better for Arthur to do it himself than to let them keep accounts and manage money. At least he could calculate that 0.8 and 0.5 multiplied by 0.4. This question alone stumped millions of certain audio users who had received 9 years of compulsory education. It was noon when the group walked out of the Red Castle. It was a bit too early to go back to their residence, so they wandered around the streets and alleys of King's Landing. When passing by a tailor's shop, Arthur, let me make you 2 sets of beautiful clothes, Patrick suggested, covering his nose with his hand. That's fine. Arthur, who was also holding his nose, glanced at Patrick's bright yellow silk clothes and decided to customize a similar one. If the tailor's fee was not too high, he would even think about embroidering a few dragons on the clothes. Of course, not the pterosaurs of Targaryen, but the snake bodies and deer antlers of Daxia. Let's also feel what it feels like to receive the mandate from heaven and live forever. My lords, please come in. The shop owner, who was wearing embroidered silk clothes, was very enthusiastic, with a smile on his face, and made a gesture of inviting people in. Although a large number of outsiders poured into King's Landing, most of them brought business to the blacksmith shop, and the tailor shop could only watch helplessly. After all, the life of a wandering warrior depends on armor, and he would like to pile all his wealth on it. After a simple selection, Arthur liked the silk material he wanted and asked for the dragon pattern he wanted. Then, after Haler's bargaining, the shop owner completed the transaction at a price of 30% of the initial price. This is a big advantage for people who have lived in big cities. Patrick, Desmond and others have no idea about the price of this kind of silk material. Haley, on the other hand, knows everything about it and bargains with a strong and shameless attitude. After measuring Arthur's waist, height and chest, the few people left. It costs 1 gold dragon and 40 silver deer for just this. Desmond was amazed. He felt that the money was really a bit wasteful. Arthur ignored him. This coach was a complete hedge knight. If you can get a free ticket, get a free ticket. If you can save money, save money. After buying some top quality sachets produced in Dawn, the group returned to the inn. The next day, morning. Haley, these lords and I have something to go out for a while. You clean up my room. Arthur said this when he walked to the door of the little girl's room. Okay. Walking out of the door quickly, Haley knelt to the lord and then went to Arthur's room to start working. Arthur placed several silver deer and copper coins in several secret corners of the room to test Haley's ability and loyalty. If she didn't find the money in the corner, and if she did find it but didn't give it to Arthur, then Arthur would give up the idea of letting her manage money. The former shows that she is careless and such a person is not suitable for managing money. The latter shows that she is greedy and even more unsuitable for managing money. Only after passing this test, there will be several more, and Arthur dared to let her manage some change. After all, he and Haley are not very familiar with each other, so they have to take it step by step. Today, Arthur and his friends went to the Dragon Cave in Rennes Hill and the famous Silent Sister Street. These attractions are almost must-visit places in King's Landing. The scorched marks of the Dragon Cave are timeless and amazing, while the monks in Silent Sister Street are old and boring, which makes Arthur shake his head. In the era without the internet, there is a frightening lack of entertainment projects. Apart from shopping and buying, there is basically no fun. Going to the brothel, that's not what Arthur wants. After all, it was all the Black Abyss, and it was a bit, well, I couldn't get down. In the afternoon, several people returned to the inn at the waist of Asenia Hill. My lord, I found 3 silver deer and a dozen copper coins in the corner of your room. Here they are. As soon as he returned to his room, Arthur saw the little girl waiting for him with money. The lord was very satisfied with this first test. At least in terms of carefulness and initial loyalty, Haley passed. I'll give you the copper coins. You did a good job. Go. Arthur picked up the 3 silver deer and waved Haley to leave. Patrick outside the door asked Haley to go out and then came in and said, "It's so boring. It would be great if there was a noble party." Arthur also felt that this day was very boring. It would be great if there was a tournament to practice. After all, Lance is a very skill oriented and he needs practice. At this moment, Desmond pushed the door in. Knight Loras Tyrell invites us to the competition venue on the banks of the Blackwater River to have some normal martial arts exchanges. P.S. Please vote for recommendation and monthly ticket. Chapter 62 Core Strength. First of all, let me say something. The character of the protagonist has been changed to a straightforward, honest, kind and righteous lord. He has also added a chivalrous image of repaying kindness and revenge, and a king who never slaps others in the face or pretends to be arrogant. I wanted to create a righteous lord image earlier, but it was a bit too saintly. It's my poor writing skills. I kowtow to everyone and apologize. In addition, the part about beating 100 people to death needs to be slightly changed. It will not affect the subsequent plot. I will upgrade it to another level, otherwise it will really be difficult to make it up. The following is the text. On the morning of the second day, the Blackwater River was crowded with people from King's Landing who were seeking shade and avoiding the stench. Hundreds of tents were scattered in the woods by the river, and servants carrying fruit plates and wine waiters holding wine barrels were walking between them. This is also a good place. After feeling the breeze and the barely audible stench, Patrick sighed. In fact, the Red Keep is a good place, but our status is not high enough, so we can't live there. Desmond said so. The coach of Riverrun was telling the truth. Generally speaking, if a noble from outside the country comes to King's Landing, the king's servants will arrange accommodation in the Red Castle. For example, Beric Dondarrion, Earl of Blackhaven in the Stormlands, can live in the Red Castle because he is a vassal of the Baratheon family of the Deer. Patrick, who is of the same rank and the first heir to the earldom, will not be paid attention to by the Red Castle, so he lives outside like Arthur and Desmond, a small noble. There is a trick to this. Because it is the Deer dynasty, the nobles of the three large territories of the Deer family, the Crown, Dragonstone, and the Stormlands are more valued than nobles of the same title in other regions. Below the Deer family, the vassals of the Lannister family in the west are valued. After all, they are the Queen's people. The rest, such as the vassals of the Eagle family of Arryn and the Vale, when the former Prime Minister Jon Arryn was still alive, they would also be treated preferentially by the Red Castle. And now, if the northern vassals of the Wolf family Stark come to King's Landing, they will also be treated preferentially. The great vassals from other major territories did not receive such treatment. The unreasonableness of this situation also reflects some of the embarrassing situations of Robert's four alliances. Logically, Robert's Iron Throne was won by the four alliances of Wolf, Eagle, Fish and Deer. Considering that the Deer family soldiers did not fight much in the early stage, the other three families made major contributions to Robert's throne. However, the Reach and the Westerlands, which were the top two in strength, lived out the value of United Front by preserving their strength. So Robert married the eldest daughter of the Lord of the Westerlands, to maintain the unity of the Seven Kingdoms. In this way, the three families of Fish, Wolf and Eagle, who fought for the world, put in the most effort, but got the pre-war status. The Westerlands did the least, but got the greatest benefit. Consolidating the existing status is the proposition of the Lannisters led by Tywin. The Reach performed well, but because it was the strongest among the Seven Kingdoms, after more than 10 years of development, it had some different ideas. Seeking a status that matches strength has always been the core demand of the Reach led by the Rose family. Considering that they cannot overthrow the throne, all they can do is to marry the king. But if the king changes, they will also support the candidate who is willing to pay a high price. Even within the Deer family, because Stannis, who has the greatest military merit, got the smallest Dragonstone, and Renly, who has no merit, got the Stormlands and Storm's End, they gradually developed a grudge against each other. Robert's throne has long been shaky, because of his immature performance in politics. Littlefinger Baelish instructed Lysa Arryn to poison the former prime minister, which only gave the shaky throne the most precise kick, causing it to start to overturn. Of course, all this has little to do with Arthur and others. At this moment, what they need to face are dozens of heads and heirs of various families in the Reach, big and small, and servants several times this number. Arthur Braykin, I'm glad you accepted the invitation. Loras Tyrell, nicknamed the Knight of Flowers, stood up and greeted his guests. As for Patrick, Desmond and others behind him, he nodded symbolically. As the son of the most powerful lord of the Seven Kingdoms, Loras didn't need to build good relations with the two minor nobles and knights. The reason why the Knight of Flowers invited Arthur to come was, first, because he was very fond of Arthur's action of standing up for a commoner, and second, because of Arthur's invincible strength. I was just thinking of practicing lance, and your invitation is really a wonderful act of handing a pillow to someone who is sleepy. Arthur responded. Although the full body plate armor he ordered has not been completed, it is also good to be able to ride on a horse to find the feeling of sprinting with a lance. In a lance competition, the only condition for winning is to knock the opponent off the horse while you are still on the horse. In order to allow both sides of the competition to smoothly achieve this condition, the shields used in lance competitions are different from the convex shields and flat shields used in normal combat. The round concave shield is the shield used for lances. The only advantage is that it can prevent the special spear from slipping away and then breaking due to the two-way rush of both sides. There is no hurry. It seems that you are not wearing armor, so you can only ride a horse. The Knight of Flowers treated his recognized friend with a very friendly attitude. The two of them stopped being polite and walked to the main seat of the VIP seat and sat down. The venue was still being arranged, but due to the influence of the son of the Duke of Rose, the nobles of the River each could use it in advance. Patrick, Desmond and others did not receive the favor of the Knights of Flowers. They were arranged to sit in seats that matched their status. Of course, since there were not many people at the moment, they were not very far from Arthur. I would like to ask, is your great strength innate, or acquired through practice, or a blessing from some god? Loras asked politely, and at the same time, signaled the servant to serve Arthur wine. Of course it's not innate. This is all the strength I have gained through hard practice, Arthur said proudly. His expression now was as if the system did not exist. Loras was in awe. I didn't expect someone could train to this level of strength. Teach me, so I can be as strong as you. Arthur suppressed his smile and explained seriously. First of all, the most important thing is to train the core, that is, the power from the waist and abdomen, which is the source of your strength. And the only way to train the core is to do it in the form of sit-ups and planks. Of course, you also need to eat enough meat to supplement protein, etc. He briefly introduced his fitness experience in his previous life and tried to fool around first. Loras didn't understand what was going on, and his admiration for Arthur increased a little more. Are these all words you came up with yourself? They sound very advanced. Oh, that's right. I have been thinking about how to make myself stronger since I was a child. What I just said is just an inconspicuous but extremely basic part of my huge theory. Arthur began to talk nonsense. It seems that my invitation is correct. You can teach me a lot of knowledge beyond my imagination. Loras saw the servant coming with a wine pot and a wine glass, so he picked up the wine glass himself and poured Arthur a glass of Kington wine. The two were chatting happily until they were interrupted by a shocked voice. What? How is it possible for someone to kill more than 300 people? P.S. Please vote for recommendation and monthly ticket. Chapter 63. Questions from the River Bay Nobles. Desmond looked at the surprised reaction of the noblemen of the Reach, and the loss of composure shown by several people around him, and he was immediately quite proud. Even if you are all earls, viscounts, etc., haven't you heard of the legend of Arthur? It's too outrageous. I can't believe it. If I killed dozens of enemies, I can still explain that I'm ignorant and try to accept it. But 300 people, isn't it too fake? Several noble children of the Reach did not believe Desmond's words. Desmond raised his index finger and shook it, pretending to be unconvinced. In the final analysis, it's because you stay in the Reach and don't come out, and you don't know the wonders of this world. You know, Mr. Arthur is a real god of war, the kind of person who can form an army by himself. The coach of Reverin boasted about the Lord of the Red Mill, but it didn't convince people. Loras was attracted by the exclamation before. After listening for a while, he found that they were talking about some experiences of the handsome young man next to him. So he asked directly, it sounds like this coach of Reverin is talking about you? Yes. Arthur did not deny it, and briefly recounted the conflict with the Blackwood family a month ago. He emphasized that he was the victim, and then went to Reverin to complain, and the subsequent war. In fact, I killed only a little over 100 enemies on the spot, and the rest were killed by the hot and humid weather and quack doctors. You also know that those monks and maesters who followed the army were the doctors with the least skills. It was simply difficult to rely on them to heal cuts and arrow wounds. Arthur restored the situation at that time more objectively. There is another reason for saying this, that is, the Rose family is also a great noble who treats civilians better, and the Knight of Flowers is a middle school boy with a bursting sense of justice. This can help to win the other party's favor. In the entire Westeros continent, there are many families who are nobles who pay attention to reputation and cherish their feathers. Not only are taxes low, but they are also very caring for their subordinates. For example, the Stark Wolf family in the north, the Mormont Bear family on Bear Island, and the Tyrell Rose family in the Reach can barely be counted as such. although Arthur guessed that his family's move was to win over the hearts of the people. After all, the Rose family's historical heritage was not very deep, and there was no gap between them and other great nobles in the Reach. Only in terms of being close to the people did his family walk in the forefront of the nobles in the Reach. But it also really benefited the people. In terms of deeds, and not the heart, the Rose family can still be dealt with. I admire your courage. If it were me, I would not dare to fight with 500 people and enemies 3 times my own. Loras had a better impression of the man in front of him, but he still had some doubts in his heart, but he didn't show it. After all, those who can kill 3 or 5 enemies are already top players on the battlefield, and those who can kill about 10 enemies can be worthy of being the vanguard general. If you can kill dozens of people in a battle, you will definitely be famous throughout the continent, and the bards of later generations will also sing his story. As for people like Arthur Dayne, the sword of the gods, who knocked down his 5 kings' good brothers while peeing, he could be the ceiling of the entire continent's military strength for a period of time. Of course, the sword of the gods is the best in the continent in single combat, but in a crowded battlefield, warriors like Arthur Braykin and Robert, who are able to perform miracles with great strength, have stronger lethality. Because the hammer is inherently better at breaking armor than the great sword. Loras did not doubt Arthur's words on the surface, but it was obvious that others were still not convinced. But we haven't seen Sir Arthur show his might, so how do we know this is true? That's right, I only saw this Baron cut off Sir Meryn Trent's sword with one sword, which doesn't prove what Desmond said is true. Everyone can brag, including you Riverman. As the foot-binding cloth of the 7 kingdoms, the Riverlands may only have one man, Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, and the rest. Humph. A group of 1st and 2nd tier nobles in the Riverlands around Arthur expressed their contempt. It's no wonder they reacted like this, because the Riverlands were originally the lowest end of the 7 kingdoms war power contempt chain. If it was someone else who was despised, Arthur might have endured it, but he was questioned, and he felt angry. He turned to the River Reach nobles who spoke very aggressively. Why, you want to test my skills? A tall brown-haired knight stood up. Try it. Don't think I'm afraid of a little baron like you. Another man who looked very similar to him also stood up and agreed with the people around him. It's just cutting a sword. What's the big deal? Now you want to deceive Sir Loras with a false story that I don't know how to make up. I really can't stand people like you. The 2 men were very resentful that Arthur sat next to Loras as soon as he arrived. They were relatives of the Knight of Flowers and the core children of the first-line nobles in the River Reach, but they only sat in the row behind the main seat. This is the twins Horus and Harbor of the Redwine family. The Knight of Flowers first explained to Arthur gently. Then he turned to the 2 of them and smoothed things over in a calm tone. 2 sirs, treat our guests in a friendly way, and don't let the guests think we are barbarians like the Dothraki. Although these 3 people are knights, the difference in status is easy to show. After Loras spoke, the 2 twin brothers obviously restrained themselves. Although they still looked unconvinced, they sat down obediently. Let's continue to talk about ways to increase strength. Seeing that the situation had eased, Loras returned to the previous topic. Arthur shook his head. No, I think it's time to give these 2 knights some life experience, so that they know not to rush to question things they don't understand. The Lord of the Red Mill wanted to show his true strength in front of Loras and many noble children of the River Bay, first to convince this group of people, and second to cultivate his own fans. Tapwater fans like Desmond and Patrick promote their achievements wherever they go. After making a name for themselves, many things will be easier to solve. Loras was puzzled, and his handsome face was full of doubts. He asked, are you going to challenge one of them? After hearing what Arthur and the Knight of Flowers said, the 2 brothers became restless again. What, you still want to compete with me? Any one of us brothers can beat you, a liar who is full of lies. Arthur shook his head. You misinterpreted what I meant. After a pause, in the shocked eyes of many River Bay nobles, he said to the 2 of them, you 2 come at me together. What do I, Arthur, have to fear? P.S. Please vote for recommendation and monthly ticket. Chapter 64 The Redwine Twins. As soon as these words came out, the nobles of the Reach were furious. Who do you think you are? You dare to challenge our Harbor and Horace? You are really overestimating yourself. Meryn Trent is a notorious scoundrel in the King's Guard. Do you think you can beat the Redwyne twins? If you can beat him. The Riverlanders are not very good at fighting, but they are quite good at talking. He is just relying on Ser Loras's preference for him, and is sure that he can't fight, so he is so presumptuous. Patrick was furious when he saw his new idol being provoked, and the Riverlanders being insulted by them. Bullshit. Arthur is a man who can kill 5 or 6 wild boars. How could he be afraid of 2 little knights? Defeating them is a piece of cake for Arthur. It's not difficult at all. But obviously, these words cause new controversy. Look, you're bragging again. Killing 5 or 6 wild boars, is that something that one person can do? That's right, 1 wild boar is enough for an army of more than a dozen people. To brag that one person can kill 5 or 6 wild boars is not only unreasonable, but also makes us look like fools. Enough. Loras shouted, speaking like this, do you still look like a son of an official? He didn't really believe Arthur's words. At this moment, he also wanted to see the real strength of this man, but he still had to save face. After being scolded by the 3rd son of their lord, the people of the River Reach suddenly quieted down, but the resentful expressions on their faces still betrayed their hearts. The Knight of Flowers then turned to Arthur and asked, are you really determined to challenge these 2 brothers at the same time? Yes, force is the best way to shut people up, Arthur responded. Then he called his personal servant Medden and asked him to get the sledgehammer and the greatsword New Moon that he had placed in the inn. Medden left quickly and went with Patrick's 2 servants to complete the master's order. After all, it is still very difficult for one person to carry 2 heavy weapons. Pretending to think for a moment, Loras agreed to the fight. The battlefield is ready, and the fence for the group battle has been built and can be used now. The only drawback is that Arthur himself has no armor. Of course, he can beat the twins without armor. But after the enthusiastic Knight of Flowers knew that Arthur's armor was still being made, he insisted that the servants bring their own plate armor and let Arthur wear it to deal with it, so as not to be cut in the battle. Coincidentally, the 2 are about the same height, and the plate armor is suitable. Arthur happily accepted the proposal, but this attracted more ridicule from the nobles of the River Bay, because in their opinion, Arthur, who couldn't even take out a beautiful set of plate armor, was more suspected of talking nonsense. Whether it is bragging or not, I will let you know in a while. This is Arthur's verbal response to the ridicule. Of course, the 4th response later will be more rough and simple. After a long time, Medden and his men finally brought back the New Moon and the hammer. Arthur, who had already put on Loras' beautiful plate armor, picked up a weapon in one hand and walked into the arena. You have to be careful not to damage Lord Loras's plate armor. This is not a cheap item that you can afford to pay for. One of the twins said this before the battle officially began. The other added, I don't know if you can use a heavy weapon in each hand. In response, Arthur just snorted and put down his mask. Strength will make them shut up. The 3 stood still and prepared to fight. The fence was filled with onlookers. In addition to the nobles of the River Reach, many people and noble knights who were enjoying the cool air nearby also came. The latter were attracted by the gimmick of the tournament, but they would have to wait a week before they could officially watch the battle. Now they were itching to do anything. Any battle would ignite their desire for violence and blood. I don't know if it was the elder brother or the younger brother. Someone holding a shield in one hand and a half sword in the other took a few steps forward and took the lead in probing. The other man was holding a 2-handed sword, preparing to go around. It seems that these 2 people are not completely without tactical awareness, Arthur commented on his opponent. He held the New Moon in his left hand and swung a hammer in his right hand, rushing towards the man in front of him. First, he used the hammer to break his 5-pointed shield, and then used the New Moon and the hammer to hit him hard a few times, temporarily forcing this person away, and then turned around and fought with the opponent behind him. This is Arthur's plan. After all, he has not yet practiced to split his attention, and cannot use the sword in his left hand and the hammer in his right hand to fight 2 enemies. The situation is not much different from Arthur's idea. Arthur's strange strength and hammer smashed the 5-pointed shield wrapped in a layer of iron sheet at once, leaving a big hole in the middle. Then the New Moon and the opponent's half-sword collided violently, creating a series of sparks. This is the response of the onlookers to Arthur's breaking the shield with one blow. Obviously, they who are watching for fun like this visually impactful picture very much. Arthur was already strong, and Hopper, who also held a weapon with one hand, was no match for him. The effect of the first collision between the new moon and the half sword was already satisfactory to Arthur. Because the man in front of him could no longer bear the force, he had to guide the sword in his hand to the ground to relieve the force. How can this person be so strong? This was the only thought in Hopper's mind at the moment. Just when Arthur was about to pursue the victory and expand the fruits of victory, the attack from behind came. He waved the new moon with his left hand to block the sword, then changed his steps and turned half his body so that his hammer could attack the opponent. Die! Horace shouted, and the two-handed sword suddenly exerted force, as if he was ready to kill Arthur with a sword. Two hands against one hand. I don't believe you can still hold on. But obviously Arthur's arm strength exceeded his imagination. A few breaths passed, and Arthur's left hand holding the sword did not move at all, but the right hand holding the hammer turned around. Then he smashed it hard. Ah! Horace's thigh suddenly sent a sharp pain, making him scream. He estimated that the thigh armor must have been deformed by the hammer. How could this man be so strong that he could use two heavy weapons that ordinary people could hardly wield with one hand? Horace hurriedly pulled away and limped back 2 steps. But this caused new trouble for his brother. Arthur swung the hammer and hit Hopper. Amid the exclamations of the crowd, the hammer completely shattered the wooden shield and hit Hopper. The new moon also chopped the enemy at the same time. The two violent collisions at the same time made Hopper's center of gravity unstable, and he fell to the ground all of a sudden. Then the new moon was placed on his neck. I surrender. I surrender. Hopper, who fell to the ground, reacted quickly and made the most correct choice. There was only one enemy left, and Arthur turned around and rushed towards him. After Arthur bent his two-handed sword with a hammer, the man also cleverly expressed his intention to surrender. You are really a strong warrior. Horace expressed his admiration in this way. In just 2 rounds, Arthur had already defeated the twins of the red wine family, which made the two of them blush and feel inferior after taking off their masks. It also made the onlookers exclaim with excitement. Of course, some people felt that they didn't see enough. As for the many noble children of the River Reach, their expressions were different, and their faces were extremely exciting. Even Loras, the Knight of Flowers, became quiet at this moment, as if he was digesting the scene he had just seen. Arthur was very satisfied with the performance of these people. He called the servant maiden, asked him to pack up his weapons, and then walked towards Loras and others. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 65 Party. It seems that your strength is still beyond my original expectation. The Knight of Flowers looked at Horace with lingering fear and sighed. The latter was now being hurriedly taken off his thigh armor by 4 or 5 servants, but due to the extremely exaggerated deformation, it was difficult to take it off. Horace was troubled by the continuous severe pain in his legs. Before the Meester's poppy milk was delivered, hoarse roars and painful groans were the only 2 things he could do. It's just that they are too weak. Arthur took off his mask and helmet, took the cloth handed over by the servant, and wiped his sweat. To defeat these 2 people depends on absolute strength and leading agility. When the gap in strength is large enough, skills lose their effect. Although Arthur feels that he still lacks some skills, the nobles of the River Reach, led by Loras, obviously don't think so. In their opinion, Arthur is already strong enough to ignore skills. After all, the brothers Horace and Hopper are both core members of the Red Wine family, a first-line noble in the River Reach. Judging from the strength of the Red Wine family with nearly 10,000 soldiers, the only nobles in the entire Westeros that can surpass his family are the Lannister family, the Rose family, the Hightower family, and so on. In other words, there are many feudal lord families that cannot compare with the Red Wine family. How can the knights trained with such a background be weak in combat power? Some smarter children from 2nd and 3rd tier families who are not proud of their status have changed their attitudes and approached the 2 to chat. One of them recognized the sword new moon of the Earl of Harrenhal, the Riverrun family, and used it to start a conversation. Arthur openly admitted how it came into his hands, which also confirmed what Patrick said before about killing the wild boar. So the people in the Reach changed their views on Arthur. It turned out that what he and his companions said was true, without exaggeration or falsehood. The clown was actually me. This is the feeling of quite a number of nobles present. After today, I'm afraid that the reputation of Arthur, the newly promoted powerful warrior, will gradually spread throughout King's Landing. He is also known as the first-line Knight of Westeros, such as the Kingslayer, the Riston, and the Knight of Flowers. There may be people who are curious about whether Arthur's strength is stronger or the power of the mountain is greater. Before the two of them officially fight, there must be a lot of such arguments. After chatting for a while, and riding a horse to get a feel for the lance, and having a free lunch, Arthur, Patrick, Desmond and others left. They will use the afternoon to prepare for the invitation of the Knight of Flowers in the evening. Yes, the Knight of Flowers invited them to a party in the evening. The life in the Reach is rich, and the Lord Rose family is a relative of the first-line nobles Redwyne, Hightower, Brown and other families, and they have frequent exchanges. Therefore, the Rose family's home castle High Court often holds grand parties, such as masked parties and costume parties. This custom was also brought to King's Landing. Tonight, there is a small, but extremely high-end party. The participants are the core children of the first and second line families in the Reach, as well as the top and second top family members of the other 6 countries recognized by the Rose family. Patrick, the third tier heir from a remote area, and Desmond, the sworn Knight of Reveron, were not able to enter such a gathering. But the Knight of Flowers invited them for Arthur's sake. They felt honored. There are benefits to following a tough guy like Arthur. You look like a rich man. This was Desmond's evaluation of Arthur. At this moment, they were heading to the vicinity of the Red Castle. Arthur, dressed in bright yellow silk, had an upright figure and handsome appearance, and looked very noble. Along the way, he attracted quite a lot of people to turn their heads. The oriental dragon pattern embroidered on his body made the people he met along the way speculate that he was a prince from somewhere, or a top foreign tycoon. After all, the big families in Westeros were all memorized by these spectators of the Game of Thrones, but this deerhorn snake body pattern did not belong to any of them, and Arthur's demeanor and appearance could not be unknown. Then he can only be a distinguished guest from the Eastern continent, which is the common view of many people. I'm made to look like a little follower. Patrick looked sour. His clothes were made of the same material as Arthur's, but they didn't have that glamorous feeling, which made the air of Heijiang City full of jealousy. I'm just an ordinary little noble, Arthur said modestly. He didn't care about the eyes of the people on the road and the envy of his companions. How to build a good relationship with the great nobles in the River Bay was the issue he focused on. The top few families in the River Bay, the Rose family had more than 10,000 troops, the Hightower family had more than 10,000 troops, the Redwyne family had nearly 10,000 troops, the Rowan family had about 5,000 troops. And the other small families were countless. With the standing military strength of these 4 families, it might be a bit difficult for each family to come up with hundreds of sets of top-level armor, but if each family had 100 or 200 sets, it would be easy to get 500 or 600 sets. Arthur fantasized that it would be great if he could establish a relationship with all 4 families, and then use his prize money from the tournament to buy hundreds or thousands of sets of armor. Even though he had already ordered 200 sets of iron armor, who would complain about too much armor when troubled times were approaching? Moreover, their armor was ready-made and made in large workshops, so the quality control was guaranteed. The armor produced by the blacksmith shop in King's Landing had to be made on the spot and was made in sets, so the quality was not very stable. The party of the Knights of Flowers was held in a courtyard not far from the king's home castle, the Red Castle. This was enough to illustrate the embarrassing position of the Rose family. On the one hand, they were the most powerful feudal family in the Reach, so they were wealthy enough to buy a large courtyard outside the Red Castle. On the other hand, they were not in the power center of King's Landing, but were infinitely close to it. You must be Lord Arthur Braykin, right? Please follow me. A dozen servants had been waiting outside the courtyard early. One of them had obviously been ordered to guide Arthur and his companions. After seeing the bright yellow unfamiliar pattern and the symbol of Heijiang City, he immediately stepped out of his position and came forward. Arthur nodded, and in the eyes of the servants and passers-by on the street, which had different meanings of envy and jealousy, he went in silently with his companions. After passing through the long and narrow corridor, they were able to enter the courtyard, and then walked into the building. After walking a long way, they arrived at the door of a hall. This shows that the area of this courtyard is quite large, which fully demonstrates the financial strength of the Rose family. The servant who led the way opened the door for them, and made a gesture to invite them in. As soon as Pooh opened the door, the noisy voices in the hall reached Arthur's ears. There were already many nobles in gorgeous dresses gathered inside, talking and laughing, and behaving differently. Maids with pretty faces and outstanding figures came and went with fruit plates and fine wine, and were occasionally touched by some playboys. This is the life of the upper class. Arthur, who attended such a party for the first time, sighed. He took a deep breath, and walked into the hall. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 66 Armor. This is Arthur, the invincible Arthur. Horace Redwine introduced him. After a simple bandage on his leg, he rushed to attend the party. Because of the protection of the plate armor, only his thigh flesh was pinched and bleeding and bruised, and his femur was not injured. So he just limped a little. Nothing serious. I have heard of it. Is it the warrior who beat Cersei's cousin Cleus? Yes, a real warrior who is not afraid of power. Speaking of which, the Lannisters and the Freys are really perfect relatives. I'm happy to see their people being beaten. Several nobles of the Bay talked about it, and their words were all gloating over the Lannisters and their relatives. If their feudal lords want to take the throne, the biggest possibility is to replace the political ecological niche of the Lion House and let the Rose House have a queen. These nobles have all received extremely strict lord education, unlike Jaime who was sent to be a servant and Eddard who was sent to be an adopted son, so they still have vision and knowledge. At such a gathering, they knew better than anyone what to say. Although in other places, what they said might mean something else. Hopper, the other twin, was also nearby. Seeing Arthur here, he first came over to express his admiration for Arthur's extraordinary strength, and then patiently introduced to many nobles how he was completely convinced by Arthur today. He even boasted about how the Lord of Red Mill fought against thousands of enemies alone, broke through the army of Raventree City, and killed hundreds of enemies. He also made up the details in detail, as if he was there. His words were full of affirmation of Arthur's strength and admiration for him. In fact, his behavior is easy to understand. The more he boasted about Arthur, the more it was natural for him to be defeated quickly. It was a typical fanatical behavior of a convert. Desmond and Patrick also added details at the right time, adding a bit of credibility to Arthur's deeds. The circle of nobles also cooperated with the flattery of several people, exclaiming and tut-tutting from time to time. They are professionals in supporting roles. Arthur did not correct some of the mistakes Hopper made. He quietly ate the delicious pastries made by the court pastry chef, and drank the fine wine produced in Kingting Island. As the second richest family in the country, the food provided at the Rose family's party was exquisite and delicious, matching the status of his family. In terms of details, every piece of pastry was printed with a rose pattern. This is terrifying. Ordinary people eat big pot stews with random flavors, but the top nobles can even print family patterns on a piece of pastry. The inequality is obvious. Even more exaggerated is the martial arts competition. The champion of the Lance competition is 40,000 gold dragons, compared to the annual living cost of Heijian farmers, which is only a few silver deer. Under normal circumstances, one gold dragon can be exchanged for 210 silver deer. It can be seen that the extravagant life of the top nobles has reached a magical level. Of course, these are all things Arthur cannot change. He can only sigh in his heart and then eat a lot with the plate in his hand. It's important to eat. At this moment, someone's voice spread throughout the hall. Sorry, my friends, if I had known about this party in advance, I would have arranged to hold it in the Red Keep. Arthur turned around and found that it was Renly, the younger brother of King Robert, the Lord of Stormlands, and the Duke of Storm's End. This man is really good at winning people over, and he has to sell his favors wherever he goes. Arthur never believed that Renly didn't know the location of the party in advance. because the host of the party, Loras, is his Pythagorean friend and bedfellow. But the party was still held in a courtyard somewhere in the Rose House, which shows that Renly didn't care about it at all. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of the nobles present changed visibly. It seems that this useless nonsense has accumulated a lot of popularity for Renly. Although Arthur can't do such a thing now, he still learned it silently. When he succeeds in the future, he can always use such a small trick to win people's hearts. Some of the high-ranking nobles of the River Bay immediately came up and surrounded the Duke of Storm's End. Arthur and the others were very conscious and continued to stay where they were and chat. After all, they really had little interaction with people of the level of the prince's brother and the duke. In addition to the interesting things they experienced, reminiscing about their ancestors and discovering the relationship between their ancestors were also important topics for many nobles to talk about. Fortunately, although Arthur's title was a bit low, the history of the surname Bracken was long enough. In fact, considering that most of the noble families of the Reach could be related to the long-lost Gardener family of the Reach King, and Bracken was once the king of the river in the First Men's period, at least they claimed to be, so a considerable number of nobles present had family histories that were not as prominent as Arthur's ancestors. After having a common topic, the relationship was always drawn very quickly. In addition, the twins of the Redwyne family tried their best to promote Arthur to their circle, and Arthur's obvious anti-Lannister stance. When most of the party was over, the Lord of the Red Mill actually became the focus of the party. Arthur couldn't remember how many nobles from the Reach introduced their families to him about the origin of the surname Bracken. Even the factions during the Blackfire Rebellion were brought up. During the Blackfire Rebellion, the nobles of the River Reach and the Stormlands, who were dissatisfied with the Iron Throne being too close to Dawn, united and supported Daemon Blackfire, a noble bastard of the Targaryen family, to launch the Blackfire Rebellion. Even though the Blackfire Rebellions were suppressed several times, the Black Dragon Party and the Red Dragon Party who supported the Iron Throne mostly disliked each other. The legendary knight Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, refused to marry the daughter of the Redwyne family of the Black Dragon Party, which was a perfect example, because the Tully family was a Red Dragon Party. Coincidentally, the Brackens also followed the Black Dragon Party in the rebellion. This brought everyone closer again. After hearing about Arthur's conflict with the forces of Raventree City in the north of the territory and Arthur's desire to purchase some armor and weapons from the River Reach family, many nobles present readily agreed to sell him a batch at market price. One company might sell a dozen sets, and the combined sales of 7 or 8 companies would be considerable. Add to that the 300 sets of standard armor and weapons promised by the Redwyne twins, and the total would reach 600 or 700 sets. This made Arthur very happy, but also a little anxious. After the tournament, we must act quickly to purchase armor in the Reach. Otherwise, once the War of the Five Kings breaks out in a few weeks, these elites may not be willing to fulfill their promises. After all, in troubled times, armor is more useful than gold dragons and food. My neighbors farm and I make guns, and my neighbors are my granaries. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 67 Someone is lazy. Baron, Arthur Bracken level 6 experience. 4024/6000 strength. 18 agility. 12 intelligence. 7 charisma. 9 skills. Iron Bones 4. Power attack 7. Power throw 1. Power bow 1. Weapon mastery 2. Shield defense 1. Run 2. Riding 5. Horse archery 0. Looting 0. Coach 0. Tracking 0. Tactics 1. Guide 0. Scouting 0. Healing 0. Surgery 0. First aid 0. Engineering 0. Persuasion 1. Prisoner management 1. Leadership 3. Trading 0. Weapon proficiency. One-handed weapons 74. Two-handed weapons 125. Palliums 87. Bows 31. Crossbows 31. Throwing 31. The experience gained from killing wild boars and daily training of troops allowed him to reach level 6. Daily training now provides 40 to 50 experience points per day, and surprisingly, the number of experience points per day is not stable. Although Arthur is not sure how this is calculated, one thing is clear. Someone is slacking off during training. This may be because Arthur is not in his territory. When he returns, he will definitely teach the lazy person a lesson. The Lord of the Red Mill thought so. The attribute points brought by the upgrade continue to be added to strength, 2 skill points, 1 for shield defense, and 1 for riding, and 10 weapon points for long pole weapons. The long pole weapon is added because the Guandeo belongs to this category. As the main weapon for immediate combat in the future, the proficiency must be raised a little. Shield defense and riding are for the lance competition. After putting away the panel, Arthur went out to find Patrick and others. Today they have to go to Steel Street to check the progress of the order. Whether it is the Guandeo used by Arthur himself, the pumpkin hammer, the full body plate armor, or the 200 sets of iron armor, they all need to be delivered and used urgently. At least some of them must be delivered before the start of the martial arts competition in 3 days. Otherwise, many things will be messed up. At the party 5 days ago, he and the twins of the Redwin family made an appointment to go to the river bend to buy ready-made weapons and armor for him. In addition, the mountain would start to burn, kill and loot along the Red Fork River in 2 or 3 weeks, and he had to rush back to fight the mountain before then. The schedule was really full. Fighting the mountain could not be omitted because it was the first step to win people's hearts. Hundreds of thousands of landless peasants were waiting to be fed to Arthur. Imagine that their lords would either hide in the sturdy castle and not come out, or they would be chopped by the mountain sword after coming out and could not protect their people. Just when their homes were burned by a small group of Lannister troops, a handsome guy suddenly appeared, drove out the Westerland army and saved them. As long as they were normal people, they would definitely choose to follow the person who saved them. When there were more such landless peasants, it would be of great help to Arthur. Among the tens of thousands of peasants, thousands of people could always be picked out to carry 5-meter long spears, equipped with large shields, and form a tight array, so their combat effectiveness was not low. Several people climbed up the iron street near the top of Asenia Hill to find the blacksmith shop of Tob, who had ordered the weapons. "Sir, your sledgehammer, broadsword and plate armor are ready." After checking the token, Tob directed the apprentices and blacksmiths to carry out the 3 items. The plate armor and broadsword were fine, as 3 apprentices could carry out 2 of them. The sledgehammer was much more exaggerated. It took 2 muscular blacksmiths to lift it together. Tob was extremely satisfied with the amazing hammer he made. It was perfect, except that no one could use it. He glanced at the group of guests, wondering how the 6 of them would move to their residence. Tob made up his mind that, if the guests could not move it, and asked him for help, he would definitely ask for a gold royal as a transportation fee. The 2 strong men carefully placed the giant hammer, whose head was larger than a human head, on the ground, but the moment it landed, everyone present felt a vibration. Whether it was seen or felt, it was enough to shock ordinary people. This hammer is too terrifying. As long as it can be swung, no armor can withstand a blow. An apprentice couldn't help but sigh. But no one can swing it. I think even the legendary mountain can't do it. It can only be a work of art. The person next to him echoed. A pedestrian on the street was watching the excitement and carefully expressed his guess. This lord just made a decoration and placed it in the hall of his castle to make visitors marvel. What does it matter if no one can use it? What do ignorant people know? Mr. Arthur has trained his supernatural power. It's easy for him to lift a hammer. Patrick defended his idol like this. Desmond also scolded a few people. The mountain can't lift it, but it doesn't mean that this lord can't lift it. Several people shut up immediately, but they were angry and obviously not convinced. Arthur ignored them. After glancing at the group of chatterers coldly, he walked to the side of the hammer, bent down and picked it up, and the hammer left the ground. Although he had to use both hands to lift it, it was not difficult to use. At most, it slowed down his pace. How is this possible? How can someone lift such a huge hammer? How did this lord do it? I'm really ignorant. The onlookers sighed and were shocked by what they saw. As for Tob, the maker of the sledgehammer, he opened his mouth and eyes wide, not believing that this customer could lift it so easily. Others only knew that the sledgehammer looked huge, but did not know its true meaning. But Tob himself knew that a weapon that could only be lifted by 4 strong men was not for ordinary people. This showed that the customer's strength had reached a level that ordinary people could not imagine. I'm afraid that he is the strongest man in the whole continent. Arthur waved the hammer with both hands for a few times and felt satisfied, so he paid the rest of the money. Tob took the golden dragon and silver deer in a daze and watched them leave in a daze. What he saw today is destined to be remembered for a lifetime. After asking 3 servants to send the plate armor and golden guandeo back to the inn, Arthur took the hammer to the blacksmith shop that ordered 200 sets of iron lamellar armor. There was no other way. He was the only one who could carry this super heavy weapon. The 3 servants couldn't lift it, and Patrick Desmond was not a workman. "Master, I'm afraid your lamellar armor will take a few days longer to be delivered," the shop owner, who was only wearing a loincloth, said with a smile. Just like the work he had done this week, he was making square armor plates for Arthur at this moment. However, all the masters, craftsmen, and apprentices in the nearby blacksmith shops were swinging their hammers until they were smoking, and the progress was still a little behind. After all, the number of armor plates for 200 sets of iron lamellar armor was still a bit too much. Arthur threw the huge hammer in his hand to the ground. As expected, there was a strong vibration from the ground, which made the shop owner's face suddenly look ugly. As a blacksmith, he knew the weight of the hammer very well. Before the customer could say anything, he surrendered first. "Please rest assured, I will deliver the goods on time as agreed before. Even if I don't eat, drink or sleep, I will definitely make enough armor for you. Just remember your words." After Arthur said this, he took the hammer and left with his companions. Now, they have to buy 2 strong horses for Arthur to use as mounts for Arthur's lance competitions and future battles. PS. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 68 Buying a Horse. The previous 2 chapters have been revised. Are you sure you want this horse? The owner of the stable asked uncertainly. He is the owner of the largest stable in the entire King's Landing city and is now accompanying the noble lords who have just arrived to look at horses. The tournament will start in 3 days, and it is actually a bit late to choose a mount now. Therefore, the business of the stable is a bit slow, and he can accompany customers to carefully select. Arthur looked at the giant red horse that looked very much like the Shire horse in his previous life, nodded and said, "This is it." After he put the sledgehammer in his residence, he and his companions took the servants out of the city to buy horses. Arthur is not short in height. There is basically no one taller than him on the street, but he is only as tall as the shoulder of this horse, which shows how tall it is. What's more exaggerated is that the muscles of this horse are as strong as those of a bison, but it is taller. Even a half-ton camel looks much thinner in front of it. But this horse's shoulders are too wide. It will be very uncomfortable to ride on. Desmond is the coach of Riverrun, so he naturally knows why this giant horse is not adopted by the army as a warhorse. He kindly reminded his companion. "That's right, and this horse is too clumsy. It can only walk and trot, not can run, so it is much slower than other types of horses." The owner of the stable added, "Normally, horses have 4-beat walks, 2-beat trots, 3-beat canter, 4-beat gallops, and other steps, and the speed increases in sequence. As for special steps such as walking, only a very small number of war horses that have been trained since childhood can do it. It has nothing to do with increasing speed, but is just for shock absorption and beauty." The bronze weir, originally named horse stepping on flying swallow, is now renamed bronze galloping horse. The movement of the horse is walking. It can't run or gallop, which means that the speed of this horse is really slow. But it is just right for Arthur, because only this kind of giant horse can carry Arthur, who is wearing heavy armor and holding several heavy weapons. "Don't worry about the speed. I can just buy a faster warhorse to use as my daily riding mount. This horse is specially used for the battlefield. I will be fully armored, carrying a large guandeo and a sledgehammer. A weak mount is not acceptable." Seeing that the customer was determined, the owner of the stable did not dissuade him. "As long as you can ride it, I will sell it to you at a low price." Patrick, who was standing aside and observing the giant horse carefully, asked curiously, "Why do you have to ride it to sell it?" "Although I haven't sold this horse for a long time, since it came into my hands, I can't cheat customers just to make money, right?" the owner of the stable explained. This kind of giant horse cannot be used as a warhorse, and ordinary farmers cannot afford to feed this big guy, so there is not much market in Westeros. Only a few nobles who are favored buy it back as a pet. The owner of the stable originally wanted to sell this giant horse during the tournament to make a little money, but he didn't expect that the knights and nobles who came to King's Landing either prepared their own horses or were picky hedge knights who didn't even look at this kind of goods. And the horse's appetite was extremely amazing. Just the normal cost of feeding the horse with grass and concentrated feed made him feel sorry for his silver deer. The action of the sucker who wanted to buy it was just what he wanted, but for the sake of business reputation, he still reminded him. Arthur agreed with this remark. He was also a kind person. If I form my own cavalry in the future, I will definitely buy horses from you first. Okay, my lord. My name is Sandra. The horse shops on the east coast of Westeros can contact me. If there are large orders, you can find me. Although Sandra did not recognize which noble family the stag antlers and snake body pattern embroidered on this tall and handsome lord was the logo of, but just by this high-end silk clothes and a noble face, she knew that this person was definitely a wealthy noble. Maybe he is the illegitimate son of a duke. After commanding his men to lead out the red giant horse, Sandra first comforted it and then handed the reins to Arthur. Not bad. Touching its smooth and shiny hide and strong muscles, Arthur felt that he had found a treasure. He jumped up and climbed onto the horse. The giant horse naturally didn't want to be ridden by someone, so it began to struggle. But it was a bit clumsy and couldn't raise its front hooves to let the person on its back fall off. After twisting a few times, it resigned itself to its fate. Although Arthur was very uncomfortable with his legs spread out, he still rode steadily. Sandra was very satisfied with the customer success on the first try. It's fitting that you and this horse are destined to ride on it. It hasn't been bought for dozens of days, so I think it's waiting for you. He picked up some auspicious words and kept talking for a long time. After Arthur felt that he was familiar enough, he got off the horse and let his servant lead the giant horse. When no one was riding on its back, this huge creature was still very quiet. Arthur also picked a red tall horse as his usual mount without armor, and then paid the bill. He named the giant red horse Red Hair and the red horse he rode daily Dilu. Although the problem of the mount was solved, a new problem troubled him. Dilu's saddle was given by Sandra at the horse farm for free, but Red Hair was too big and had no saddle. If Arthur wanted to ride this horse to participate in the lance competition, he had to get a saddle. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage. He also had to order a set of vests, otherwise when the war started, there would not be such a good opportunity to prepare everything. We can go to Tobb's blacksmith shop and ask him to find a way, although it is a bit expensive. Desmond suggested. Arthur also thought it was feasible, so he asked the servant to lead the horse into the city through the Gate of the Gods and go to the steel street on the top of the hill. It's not easy to make a vest for this big guy. Besides, we are a blacksmith shop and don't make special saddles. What's more, we only have 3 days. Tobb declined. Arthur took out 3 gold royals and slapped them on the table in front of Tobb. This is not about money. Although we can make it, we don't have enough time. Arthur took out 3 more gold dragons. The vest will be made within 3 days, and it will be the same color as your golden sword. As for the saddle, 2 more gold dragons appeared on the table. This time, Tobb couldn't take his eyes off it. The vest is not a huge job, it can be completed in a hurry, and the saddle can also be made by a carpenter friend of his. Don't worry, the day after tomorrow, no, tomorrow night, you can come to pick it up, and it will not delay your participation in the lance competition. I can already see how you, riding such a giant horse, can defeat all opponents with one shot, and become famous in the whole King's Landing, and the 7 kingdoms. While signaling the apprentices to measure the size of the giant horse, Tobb complimented. You are absolutely right, and I couldn't agree more. Arthur accepted the flattery calmly. At present, basically all the preparations that should be made have been done, and we are just waiting for the martial arts competition to be held. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 69 First Day. The first event of the tournament was the lance competition. The competition was held on a long strip of ground, separated by a wooden fence in the middle. 2 contestants attacked from one end on horseback. The fully armed knight held a concave shield in his left hand and a lance in his right hand, and held the butt of the lance under his armpit to fix the hollow lance. In fact, the lance used on the battlefield is not only solid, but also much shorter than the arena lance. The only thing they have in common is that they are both disposable. After each charge, a new one must be replaced. And in order to avoid hurting oneself, it is usually easy to break. The arena lance is made hollow to reduce damage. Of course, the lance of the winged cavalry is also hollow, but that is to deal with unarmored peasant soldiers, so the strength is reduced in exchange for length. If it is to deal with armored infantry, the lance is much shorter and harder. Nearly 100 Westeros knights and nobles participated in the lance competition. Civilians and wandering warriors basically did not participate in this, because lances are not an event they can afford. Most of them are preparing to sign up for archery competitions and team battles. According to the custom of the Targaryen dynasty, a registration fee was charged for the tournament, but King Robert, in order to show his generosity, waived all fees and raised the prize money for the 3 championships to tens of thousands. Moreover, the contestants' travel expenses and board and lodging expenses in King's Landing could be reimbursed by the subordinates of the Minister of Finance. This shows Robert's sincerity in spending money. Now, the first king of the Deer family, who spent 6 million gold dragons in the 300 years of accumulation of the Targaryen dynasty in 15 years, was sitting in the VIP seats with most of the courtiers, the nobles of the royal domain, and the marquesses, earls and official ladies who came after hearing the news, waiting for the start of the lance competition. Thousands of people were crowded in the long strip of open space opposite the VIP seats, guessing who would be the champion this time, and who would become famous. The nearest tournament was the 12th name day tournament of Crown Prince Joffrey. The biggest dark horse in that match was the Knight of Flowers, whose vest was covered with hundreds of roses. He defeated the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister with one shot, and became famous throughout the continent. In this match, the public had different favorites, but most people had the same view. That is, the handsome nobleman riding a giant red horse with golden armor would make the audience remember his name. Because the golden red horse was really big. It was so big that it was visible at a glance even when surrounded by nearly 100 riders. Of course, the rider's handsome face was also conspicuous. Don't you feel tired riding this horse? The Knight of Flowers, Loras, lightly squeezed the horse's belly and strolled to Arthur's side. Except for the strange posture, it's not very tiring. Arthur, who was almost splitting his legs, answered. The saddle he sat on was made by a skilled carpenter found by Tob in less than 2 days, which gave Arthur a day to get familiar with the giant horse. Although the saddle was well made, the horse's back was a bit wide and not very comfortable to sit on. The servants Medon, Jules and Piper had helped him put on his vest before they arrived at the competition venue. This was done under the guidance of Desmond. After all, none of them had ever touched such advanced things as vests. Although Arthur thought that this golden vest was really a bit coquettish, even coquettish than Loras's vest covered with roses. But when he thought that everyone's eyes were on him, he accepted this fact with peace of mind. A girl like Sansa Stark who was obsessed with looks would definitely see him. Looking at the roses on Loras's vest, he suddenly had an idea. You don't mind using one of your roses? Take whatever you want. I have plenty of roses. Loras said. He was asking his servants to help tie his throat guard and didn't care much about what Arthur wanted to do. The Lord of the Moulin Rouge picked the biggest rose, put it on his golden vest, and then lined up to wait for the stage. There were not many good riders in the front, and the competition was not very exciting. So when Arthur rode on a giant red horse in golden armor, the entire VIP seats and the public became agitated at the same time. After all, this was a player that impressed everyone. Some people with strong memories even recognized that this was the man who defeated a certain Kingsguard rogue one day a week ago. Arthur's opponent rode a much smaller and thinner horse, which made the result seem almost certain. Both sides put down their masks, and after the referee signaled the official start, they rode their horses and charged. This match is really boring. Where is your mountain? I want to see him fight this red horse rider. Robert asked Queen Cersei beside him. I don't care where a guard is. Cersei replied coldly. She did notice that the red horse knight was extremely handsome, not much different from Jaime when he was young. Robert glanced coldly at his nominal wife and said nothing more. Not far from them, Sansa and little Petyr Baelish were sitting together, talking about something. The eldest lady of Winterfell was very excited by what she saw and heard, but she was very restrained, and did not show it in her body, which only made her face more rosy. The handsomeness of this rider also left a deep impression on her. Much more handsome than that Royce, she thought to herself. Bang! Arthur's opponent was knocked off his horse by him, and then carried away by the king's servants. Red Hair walked the rest of the way with a steady pace, carrying the victorious party to the VIP seat. After opening the mask, Arthur took off the prepared rose and handed it to Sansa, whose face was rosy. Sansa wanted to scream excitedly, but considering the princes and ministers around her, she held back. This must be the happiest moment since she came to King's Landing. The handsome knight in golden armor and the act of giving flowers that attracted everyone's attention may be sung by the bards of later generations. Prince Joffrey looked at his fiancée with surprise as she was given flowers by another man. Didn't he just chat with the Hound for a few words? How come he was taken advantage of? Loras, the Knight of Flowers, who was waiting to play, was also stunned. Wasn't this what he wanted to do? How did he get there first? The people on the opposite side mobilized the strongest atmosphere since the start of the game for this action, with boos and laughter. Many people cheered for Arthur, hoping that he would do something to the eldest daughter of the new prime minister. But Arthur knew when to stop, and he ran away immediately after presenting the flowers. He didn't want to be picked on by Sandor Clegane, the Hound sent by the jealous Joffrey. The rest of the game went on as planned, and the rumbling sound of horse hooves rang until the evening, until the top four were decided: Loras, the Knight of Flowers, the Mountain, the Hound, and Arthur. Because there was really no way to finish the game, the king announced that the top 4 games would be held tomorrow, together with the team battle and archery competition. This made the people boo, but everyone still left obediently. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 70, Raising the Hammer. King Robert dragged his increasingly fat body up to the VIP seats and walked towards his seat. The noisy voices around him made him feel even worse. Before that, Cersei's decision not to let him participate in the group battle disturbed his good mood for the tournament, and the fact that he couldn't wear the breastplate this morning hit him again. Just as the king was about to take his seat, a whisper among the people attracted his attention. "Oh. 7 gods, is that true? I think it might be hollow inside. If it is solid, who can lift it? Even if it is hollow, it looks terrifying." Robert looked in the direction where the spectators in King's Landing were looking, and then he was puzzled like them. The rider on the red horse with golden armor who made it to the semi-finals yesterday was carrying a peerless giant hammer and walking towards the group battle arena not far away. The hammerhead was slightly larger than a human head, and the gleaming light on the tip of the hammermail looked particularly creepy. It was much larger than Robert's own warhammer. You know, the hammer used by normal warriors has a hammerhead that is only the size of an adult male's fist. Even so, not many people can dance with it. The king who had resurrected his thigh was most proud of his exploits of using a warhammer to kill enemies on the battlefield. 16 years ago, he still remembered the 3 victories he won in one day beside the ruins of Summerhall. At that time, he had the world in his hands with a warhammer. Barristan, the captain of the King's Guard, also saw the huge hammer. Seeing the king's puzzled expression, he explained, "Your Majesty, it may be a fake, not a solid one. Even if it's a fake, it's 2. Robert stood up suddenly and walked towards the rider. Barristan and several white robes followed. "2 what?" asked the captain of the King's Guard. "Too much for my taste," the king answered his ministers in front of the court with his usual loud voice. Since the captain of the King's Guard is usually the top knight and warrior in Westeros, and his military command ability is also first class, he is usually a member of the royal council. Barristan, who followed the king, shook his head and laughed at the fat king whose children were about to get married. Arthur placed his giant hammer at the edge of the team battle arena and asked his servant Medon to watch it. Although no thief could steal such a heavy weapon, someone watching it could prevent curious idlers from touching it, especially when he attracted many eyes along the way. But when Arthur turned around, he saw a group of idlers surrounding him. He wanted to wave his hand and let these people go to cool off, but when he saw the leader, Arthur held back the words that were about to jump out of his mouth. He couldn't let the king go to cool off, right? Seven gods, this should be my weapon. For some reason, Robert felt that this giant hammer was very suitable for his eyes. Now that I see it, it's mine. Robert walked towards the hammer and prepared to lift it to play with it. If you can lift it above your head, it's okay to give it to the king. Arthur chuckled. This is a grass-cutting weapon prepared by himself on the battlefield. How can he let this big deer who is about to be a fly take it away? Although Robert was also a top-notch warrior in Westeros and had extraordinary strength, it was still impossible for him to lift the giant hammer over his head. It's easy to lift it over your head. Robert glanced at Arthur and remembered that he had dealt with the matter between him and a relative of the Lannister family more than a week ago. If I lift it over my head, I'll treat it as your gift to me of justice. How about it? Okay, king. Please lift the hammer. Arthur stretched out his hand to signal. In ancient times, Yingdang died by lifting the tripod, and now Robert might die by lifting the hammer. The onlookers had great confidence in the king and cheered for Robert. Several Kingsguards smiled and shook their heads at Arthur, not knowing what they were thinking. The owner of the Iron Throne took off the crown on his head and let Arthur hold it, then bent down and grabbed the handle of the hammer and took a deep breath. Lift. Robert used all his strength and his face turned red. But he could only lift the hammer to a distance of one hand's width from the ground. Is this hammer really solid? The king thought to himself, feeling a little embarrassed. After trying to exert force again and confirming that he really couldn't lift it, Robert let go of the hammer and smashed it hard on the ground. The scene that the people expected of the king lifting it easily did not appear, and they only felt the vibration of the ground. Isn't this too exaggerated? Your Majesty can't lift it. What kind of team battle is this? Whoever hits this hammer will die. The knights and free warriors who were watching were talking about it. The Kingsguard were also frightened by the fact that Robert couldn't lift the hammer. Could it be a real hammer? Barristan stepped forward quickly and wanted to try it, but his performance was worse than Robert's, and he only managed to lift half of his hand off the ground. Considering that he was already a 50-year-old man, it was amazing that he could still maintain this strength. How strong are you? Robert stopped talking about the hammer and asked after taking the crown. Maybe he's the best in the whole continent. The king nodded. Even the mountain can't do it so easily. The people were silent for a while, but soon someone asked, is it really solid? Robert, who was about to leave, glanced at the person who asked coldly, I can't even lift it. How can it be fake? The king is not yet 40 years old, in his prime, although the stiffness has made him lose a lot of physical strength, but his explosive power is not much different from that of his peak. I would like to try. This person carried a bow as tall as his body, wearing a dirty sleeveless leather armor, revealing his exaggerated arm muscles. Then come and try. Arthur invited. This person was not polite. Under the gaze of the king and a large group of knights and people, he walked out of the crowd, ran to the giant hammer, bent down, stretched out his hand, and began to lift the hammer. His performance was much better than Robert and Barristan. He barely raised the hammer to his chest, but he couldn't go any further. He let go, and the hammer that fell to the ground caused a more violent vibration than before. What's the point of having a team battle? One hammer blow will turn them into meat paste. The man sighed. Robert thought this made sense. Cersei's suggestion last night not to let him participate in the team battle suddenly became reasonable. His bad mood also improved a lot. The king walked back to the VIP seat and decided to be a spectator today. This episode passed quickly, and Arthur rode on Red Hair to prepare for the earliest lance finals of the day. What he didn't know was that because of his amazing hammer, quite a number of people gave up the idea of participating in the team battle in the afternoon. The draw for the lance finals was very interesting. Loras the Knight of Flowers was still facing the mountain, and Arthur had to fight the mountain's brother, the Hound. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 71 Loras's Friendship. The first battle was between Arthur and the Hound Sandor Clegane. The two sides waited at the two ends of the field. After signaling to the king, Arthur and the Hound pressed their visors almost at the same time. Then they charged on horseback. Since Red Hair was a head taller than ordinary horses, Arthur had a great advantage in the lance competition. His center of gravity was much higher than his opponent. When the two sides charged, if the opponent wanted to knock Arthur off, he had to tilt his lance upwards a little, otherwise he would poke the red giant horse. According to the rules of the competition, if the opponent's horse was stabbed to death, he would be judged out. So Arthur's opponents had to try hard to raise the tip of their lances, but they could not knock this handsome man off his horse. The same was true for the game with the hound today. The prince's personal guard broke his lance when he charged for the first time, and also used a concave shield to block Arthur's lance. But neither side fell off the horse. So after rushing to the other side, Arthur and the hound changed their lances and started to repeat the previous behavior. Until the fourth time, the hound's mount ran a little off the track, so he lost control of the force and was knocked off the horse by Arthur. Bang! The huge sound spread throughout the venue, and even a deaf person could tell what happened, because it was accompanied by vibrations. The hound lay on his back for a long time before turning over. The audience who were closer clearly saw that his dog-shaped mask was deformed. Go and help him, let him take off his mask and helmet and rest for a while. The kind-hearted Lord Eddard gave an order in a loud voice. 2 servants from the Red Keep came forward, but were waved away by the hound. The loser staggered away, but the winner raised his visor. When passing by Sansa Stark's seat, Arthur winked at her. This made Sansa's face and neck quickly become the same color as her neatly braided long red hair. In order to integrate into the circle of noble ladies in King's Landing, the official lady from the north began to braid her hair into small braids, which she would not do when she was at home. Arthur rode his horse to the undetermined area, then dismounted and went to find his own hammer. Because the mountain's mount might cause some trouble later. After being knocked off his horse by Loras, the angry mountain cut off the poor horse's head with a sword, and then prepared to kill Loras. It must be said that the mountain's brain circuit is a bit strange. He actually wanted to kill the third son of a duke under the eyes of the king and most of the nobles. This duke is also the most powerful lord of the river reach in the 7 kingdoms, and the mountain himself is just a knight with property. His lord, Duke Tywin, was not present and could not speak for him. I don't know why the mountain has such courage. Because of Arthur's presence, the hound that originally obstructed the mountain went to rest, so Loras might be in a little danger later. He had to guard to prevent anything from happening. Even if we put aside the fact that Loras is a brother of little Rose Marguerite Tyrrell, he had to be saved for his character. The servant maiden stood by faithfully, and Arthur picked up the giant hammer and walked towards the lance field. Things were basically unchanged. After a round of staggering, the mountain was thrown off his horse by his own mount, and the Knight of Flowers did not even break his lance, so it was conceivable that he was not knocked off his horse. The people began to cheer. After all, the Knight of Flowers looked more likable than the ferocious mountain. Then the mountain began to chop off the horse's head and chop Loras according to the established procedure. The cheers that were still floating in people's ears suddenly turned into screams and exclamations. "Stop him!" the new Prime Minister shouted, but his voice was obviously not as loud as Robert's. No gold cloaks or soldiers from the north responded. Everything happened so quickly, and Loras also reacted and wanted to defend himself with a sword. But his squire was pushed down by the mountain. The Knight of Flowers was knocked off his horse by the mountain, and a piece of his breastplate was obviously deformed. Then Loras, who had evil thoughts, began to regret why he rode a mare to make the mountain's mount irritable. "I must kill you." Loras even heard the mountain's muttering. "This is over." Just when the Knight of Flowers felt that his life was about to end here, a huge hammer appeared in front of him and collided with the great sword that was slashing at him. How dare the mountain, a mere man, attack my third uncle in front of me? Arthur thought to himself, blocking the sword with the hammer, and then swung the hammer to start forging iron with the mountain. Of course, hammers are always more resistant to collisions than great swords. After the mountain's two-handed greatsword was bent by the attacks of the two, King Robert's order came. "In the name of your king, stop immediately." The mountain ignored Robert's words and continued to swing the crooked sword to chop over. Arthur was not a loyal hound, and he used all his strength to swing the huge hammer to meet it. The mountain's greatsword hit the handle of the hammer and was cut off by him. Then Arthur took advantage of the situation and hit the mountain's feet with a hammer. This made the feet wearing iron boots sink deeply into the mud, softened by the horse's hooves. With the protection of iron boots, although the mountain's feet were not broken, it should not be easy for him. Arthur, who had the upper hand, wanted to hit him with the hammer, but the mountain was obviously not a man who would suffer. He pulled out his foot very quickly and limped away. By the way, he pushed Barristan who was surrounding him. "Brave Arthur Braykin," Sansa said with emotion. After being presented with flowers yesterday, she found out the name of this handsome noble from Littlefinger. Lord Eddard nodded and approved of his daughter's words. He thought of what happened a week ago and said to his daughter casually, "This person is full of kindness and justice and is a friend you can associate with." Sansa remembered this. After Loras stood up, the onlookers began to cheer again, as if the screams just now did not exist. But this time, their cheers were directed at someone else. Arthur accepted all this calmly. The slightly injured Knight of Flowers was helped up by his servants and walked towards the tent in the distance. A few minutes later, Loras, wearing a linen suit, returned here again. "I owe you my life, Sir Arthur. You will have the friendship of me and Highgarden," the third son of the Lord of the Reach announced. Then King Robert also helped Arthur win the title of champion and a reward of 40,000 gold dragons. According to the process of the competition, Arthur had to compete with Loras, the Knight of Flowers, but the irrational behavior of the mountain saved the Lord of the Red Mill a lot of trouble. Of course, he also got more. The friendship of Highgarden cannot be ignored. There was still a long time in the morning, so the archery competition went on quickly. Arthur was not so lucky in this game. A mercenary won the championship and 10,000 gold dragons. P.S. Some people say that the hammer is too small. I think it's okay. The drum hammer is about the size of a human head, and it would be bullying if it was bigger. Please recommend on monthly votes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 72, Angay, make up for the missed chapter. It was lunchtime when the archery competition ended, so thousands of people and princes and nobles found ways to eat. Some ladies and officials had already left. The horse lance competition that attracted their attention the most had ended. The group battle in the afternoon was not what they wanted to see. Arthur and others were invited by Loras, who was still in shock, to have lunch with the supporters of the Rose family. The host Loras was not very interested. After expressing his welcome to Arthur and others, he buried his head in eating silently, so the people at the table did the same. After eating and drinking, the Lord of the Red Mill suddenly thought of someone. Angay, the champion of the archery competition. Speaking of this mercenary, Arthur is a little familiar. This person is from Dawn. In the morning, he raised the hammer to his chest. According to the original book, Angay followed the Red Monk Thoros, the Lightning King Beric Dondarrion and others, to fight against the mountain. Later, he became a core member of the Brotherhood without banners, driving out the burning, killing and looting Western Army and Northern Army for the farmers in the Riverlands. He is a righteous and good man. After Arthur saw that Jules had stopped eating, he stretched out his hand to call him over. "What's the matter?" Jules was very happy now. The set of plate armor that his nephew promised to give him had arrived and was now on him. This made him look like a brave knight, although he was so timid that he didn't even dare to sign up for a group battle. In the morning, Jules met some mercenaries he had been with before. The beautiful armor on his body made him feel very face-saving in front of these people. And Jules's entry into the tent of the Duke's family Tyrell for lunch made his fellow mercenaries drop their jaws in shock. "I have said that I'm of true noble birth." This is Jules' farewell to his former partners. There are still benefits to following the nephew. Jules now likes Arthur more and more. The archery champion, the one called Aang. "You go find him now, and remember where he is staying. I will find him in the evening," Arthur instructed. Angui should be the top marksman in Westeros, and it is perfect for him to serve as long-range firepower beside Arthur. It is only right for a shooter to follow a tank. Archery champion, Angui. Jules instantly grasped the key words. "I see. Angui is equal to 10,000 gold dragons." This is Jules' only thought. Could it be that the nephew wants to steal these 10,000 gold dragons? "Oh, and are those mercenaries with you reliable? We have to hire a large number of mercenaries," Arthur asked again. "With the war imminent, it is necessary to have more troops on hand. Mercenaries are also a good choice, although their loyalty is a little poor." Those people are cowards, they only dare to bully civilians, and dare not fight with real armies. Jules immediately betrayed the details of his former partners. Then he thought for a moment. There is a well-known mercenary group that is now in King's Landing. If you want to hire them, I can try to find their leader. Arthur asked curiously, which mercenary group? There are not many mercenary groups on the continent of Westeros, but the form of mercenary groups is extremely popular in the eastern continent of Essos. Well-known mercenary groups include the Golden Group founded by the remnants of the Blackfire Rebellion, the Second Sons, the Windblown Group, the Long Lance Group, etc. A strong mercenary group can have tens of thousands of troops, with elephants, cavalry, and infantry fighting together. The less powerful ones are all kinds of things, but at least their combat effectiveness is stronger than that of the newly armed peasants. The Warriors, also known as the Blood Troop, is a mercenary group composed of people who cannot see the sun. Most of the members are murderous and cruel, love to dress in strange clothes, but love money very much. Jules replied. Arthur remembered this mercenary group. At the beginning of the War of the Five Kings, they responded to the call of Casterly Rock and joined the army of the Westerlands, but then they rebelled and became the subordinates of Rose Bolton the Flayed. They were the ones who cut off James' right hand. As for loyalty, it seems that they are only loyal to money. But they jumped from the Lannister side to the poorest north, which Arthur couldn't understand. Such people can be used as cannon fodder or do some dirty work. Go and contact them. I will meet their leader and members tonight or tomorrow. You can also look for other scattered mercenaries. As long as they are qualified in combat effectiveness and loyal enough, you can call them. Now we have enough gold dragons, and it is very cost effective to hire 100 or 200 people to defend the territory. According to Arthur's idea, between the time when the Mountain finished horse along the Red Fork River and Tywin sent troops, he would gather tens of thousands of landless peasants. At that time, he would pick out the young and strong ones to form his own real team. From now until then, these mercenaries and the troops in the original territory will be used as a transition. Jules nodded to show that he understood, and then went out to do business. My friend, is the lunch to your taste? After Loras finished eating, he recovered a little, and began to chat with the visitor. Not bad. Arthur was full, and burped and responded to the Knight of Flowers. The two brothers Hobber and Horace were also there. Their great-aunt was the Queen of Thorns Elena Tyrrell, the grandmother of the Knight of Flowers and the real helmsman of the River Reach. One of the twins asked, Lord Arthur, do we really have to go to the River Reach to buy armor for you in the next 2 days? There are many nobles in the River Reach who don't want to leave the prosperous King's Landing. The armor they promised to give you may not be available. The two brothers promised to help Arthur buy a batch of armor, and for this, they had to follow Arthur back to the River Reach. We must leave the day after tomorrow at the latest. This was Arthur's answer. According to the Mountain's living habits, after losing the lance competition, he returned to the territory of the Westerly, and then responded to Lord Tywin's call after the imp was captured and gathered at Casterly Rock. These events happened so fast that the world could not react, so Arthur had to hurry up. Otherwise, after the Mountain's troubles were over, how could he win the hearts of the people? Arthur turned to Loras. Speaking of which, there is something I need your help with. Please tell me, I will do my best. The Knight of Flowers said. He was grateful to Arthur from the original kindness, and he recognized this little lord who was more handsome than him. I need to deposit the gold dragons in my hand with you, and then cash them in the High Court in the Reach. Since there are no banks in Westeros, coins such as gold dragons are carried by oneself. But going to the Reach to buy armor must be quick, and it is not realistic to carry several large bags of gold dragons, so Arthur thought of using the Rose House to realize the bank's remote deposit and withdrawal function. That is, he gave the gold dragons in his hand to Loras in King's Landing, and then went to the High Court to withdraw part of it. The rest is saved. Highgarden has never been affected by the war. It is a good place to save money. With the financial resources of his family, the second largest family in the Seven Kingdoms, these tens of thousands of gold dragons are still easy to handle. Arthur explained for a long time, and finally made this knight, whose mind was only on how to knock someone off his horse, understand his intention. No problem at all. I will write to my grandmother and father now. The Raven will bring this news. The Knight of Flowers cooperated very well, and Arthur solved another difficult problem of his own. P.S. Some people say that Bran was assassinated by Littlefinger in the series, let alone how the dagger of the Deer family came into Littlefinger's hands. Even the time and place, Littlefinger has no possibility at all. He stayed in King's Landing at the time, which was 2 months away. There are a lot of logical bugs in the last 2 seasons of the TV series. Not to mention compared with the books, even compared with the previous seasons, it is impossible to make up for it, so it will not be used as a reference for the plot. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 73 Team Battle. The group battle in the afternoon went very smoothly. At least that was what Arthur thought. The competition was held inside a wooden fence, and more than 30 warriors rushed in and fought in a chaotic manner. Most of them wore full sets of plate and halberd armor, and some poorer warriors wore a layer of chainmail. The weapons were also varied, ranging from two-handed swords, spears, hammers to scimitars. However, all kinds of weapons combined did not attract as much attention as Arthur's huge hammer. The onlookers were either arguing about who could defeat Arthur, or discussing how heavy the hammer was. Due to the absence of the Mountain and the Hound, Arthur looked unbeatable. Most of the knights and nobles who participated in the battle knew in the morning that there would be a warrior holding an extremely heavy hammer in the group battle, so they wisely avoided Arthur and let others go first. Coincidentally, most people thought so. So after Arthur broke the leg of a poor guy with a hammer, no one dared to challenge him anymore. This left him standing alone in the middle of the fence, watching other contestants who would rather fight to the death than challenge Arthur. Go and beat him. Go and beat the man with the hammer. Why are you so scared? Fight Arthur. The shouts from outside the arena kept coming, all asking the remaining people to fight Arthur. But this shouting continued until there were only a few people left in the arena, and it was not clear that anyone really challenged again. Arthur noticed that King Robert, who was guzzling ale and waving his fists, shouted the loudest. Finally, there were only 2 people left in the arena. Thoros, the red monk from the Arthur. Thoros was a bold middle-aged Malay mage, with a small bun on his head, which was his only stubbornness against baldness. Hey, do you know what a flaming sword is? Thoros, wearing chainmail, stroked the blade of the sword, and the sword in his hand suddenly ignited with flames. Then do you know what a giant hammer is? Arthur raised the hammer and walked towards Thoros. Metal is easy to bend when heated, and Arthur is sure to win this battle. Let me make a promise first. You can't hit my feet. The blow you gave to the Mountain this morning hurt my feet. Thoros saw Arthur coming over and reminded him while circling. He didn't have money to buy iron boots. If he was hit hard, he might not be able to walk for the rest of his life. So you mean you can hit anything except feet, right? Arthur asked back. Why are you so barbaric? Thoros waved the flaming sword and stabbed tentatively. Arthur was wearing a silver full body plate armor, and this tentative sword stab could not break the defense at all, so he ignored the red monk's attack and rushed over with the giant hammer. You're really serious? Thoros quickly dodged and stepped back a few steps to distance himself from Arthur. The iron armor he wore only covered his torso and upper arms, and the rest was leather armor. He didn't dare to fight Arthur head on. Moreover, Arthur had not wasted much energy since the fight began, but he was very tired after fighting from beginning to end. Could it be that I worked hard for most of the day just to give this brat a championship? Thoros was unwilling, but there was really no good way to break the deadlock. He could only circle around to slowly recover his energy and pray that the Lord of Light would give him a hint of victory. Red Monk, you go ahead. Such a coward is not your style. Robert shouted. He didn't look like a king at all when he was watching the fight, but like a soldier who had retired long ago. In fact, most of the people present knew the king. Considering that Robert always considered himself a warrior, and most warriors were short of money. Therefore, the king's holding of a tournament in the name of others and offering a high prize money has a strange meaning. It feels like helping an old brother who went to the battlefield together. When Thoros was suppressing the rebellion in the Iron Islands, he was indeed very brave. Barristan recalled, but against this Arthur, bravery is not the only solution. Lord Eddard nodded. This kind of warrior who is fully armored and holding heavy weapons is best defeated by crossbows and catapults, otherwise it will cost lives. But if Thoros keeps slipping away like this, Arthur may not be able to hold on first. After all, the physical consumption of wearing plate armor and holding a giant hammer is far greater than that of holding a half-handled sword. Barristan said so. His white hair showed his experience, and this statement was recognized by most people around him. Let's make a bet and see who wins. Lord Renly's brisk voice sounded. Loras, the Knight of Flowers, followed behind his troublemaker. Because Renly was knocked off his horse by the hound yesterday, and Loras was hit hard by the mountain, both of them missed the team battle. I bet on Arthur to win. 100 gold dragons. Loras shouted. Now he had a mysterious confidence in Arthur. I bet on Arthur to win, too. Renly was not familiar with the two people on the field, so he followed the choice of the Knight of Flowers. I bet on Thoros to win. He looks much more agile. Jaime, wearing golden armor, said. Last time Joffrey was 12 years old, he was defeated by Loras in the Name Day tournament, which made him have some prejudice against the Knight of Flowers. He even chose the opposite side. Robert and others were older and did not join the bet, but heard the whole process. After cheering Thoros a few more times, he turned to the younger generation and said, Thoros still has a better chance of winning. Arthur's plate armor and hammer are both very physically demanding. I have a deep feeling about this. Lord Eddard, Barristan and others echoed the king's words. They were all born as warriors and had rich combat experience, so they could naturally see the key points on the field. In their eyes, if Arthur continued to chase the Red Monk, he would be exhausted sooner or later. Then he would be passively beaten. But obviously, the development of the situation exceeded their imagination. 2 hours later. My Lord of Light. How can you still move? Thoros, who was so tired that he couldn't even swing the sword in his hand, exclaimed weakly. In front of him, Arthur shouted with full energy, surrender or take my hammer? Then he raised the giant hammer. I surrender, surrender. Thoros, who fantasized about tiring Arthur, was exhausted by being chased like a dog. Arthur had a good impression of this man, and didn't embarrass him. He put down the giant hammer, and accepted the cheers of the onlookers. But he made a wrong calculation. Is this still a human? Why isn't he tired? Is this plate armor just for show? Just that hammer, it's very difficult for ordinary people to lift it. How could he hold it and chase Thoros for 2 hours? The people expressed their doubts one after another. King Robert and others looked at Arthur, who was obviously full of energy, in silence. Hey, you took another 20,000 gold dragons from me. The master of the Iron Throne shouted in pretended anger. But those who knew him well knew that the king had no ill intentions. This is what I should take. Arthur raised his visor and glanced at a few people with a smile. In front of him, Renly and Behor were arguing about Arthur's excellent physical strength, while the Kingslayer Jaime looked grim. It was not because he lost 200 gold dragons, but because he lost some face. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 74 Mercenaries. At night, King's Landing. It's right here. Jules led Arthur to a craft academy. This Anguy and his Dornish companions are all here. Arthur nodded. These Dornishmen had a demeanor of Prince Oberyn the Red Viper. As another legendary warrior in Westeros, the Red Viper seamlessly switched between the identities of the Prince of Dorne, the mercenary of the Second Sons, and the frequent visitor of craft academies in various places. This group of Dornishmen, except for not having noble status, are very similar to their prince. Jules led the way, and Arthur, who changed into bright yellow silk clothes, followed in. The group battle was a sure thing, and he had another 20,000 gold dragons in his account. Arthur's confidence increased greatly, and he thought about winning over more mercenaries in King's Landing to increase his bargaining chips in the War of the Five Kings. Coincidentally, the tournament attracted many such mercenaries. Although some of them did not participate in the competition, they still came to King's Landing. My lord, I will arrange a 10-to-1 for you. The old woman of the Craft Academy came up to greet him. Jules in full plate armor and Arthur in silk clothes looked like a noble and a guard, so the old woman felt that she had business. No, we are here to find someone. Arthur refused. The people who come here are naturally women. I will arrange it. The old woman insisted. I'm looking for men. Arthur refused clearly, and his tone was a little tougher. Come here to find men. The old woman murmured to herself. She couldn't understand the behavior of coming to the technical college to find men, and she was shocked. Jules led the way, and Arthur followed into a large room. "My friends, where is Mr. Aang?" the Lord of the Moulin Rouge asked loudly. "Is there anything you want to talk to me about?" Uncle Aang, with black hair and black eyes, sat up from his female companion's arms and asked, "I'm a descendant of the ancestors." Arthur corrected a small mistake of his, and then made clear his purpose. "I want to hire you guys to defend my family's territory for me, because I have a conflict with another nobleman." Arthur naturally couldn't say that the War of the Five Kings was about to break out, and the conflict with Raventree City was enough to be a legitimate reason. Angai and his companions laughed. After they had laughed enough, Angai said seriously, "This afternoon, the Prime Minister sent someone to ask me if I wanted to join his guard, but I refused. Why do you think I would accept your invitation?" After thinking for a while, Arthur replied, "Because I came in person, and the Prime Minister just sent an insignificant person." "What's the difference? Do you think you are more noble than the Prime Minister?" Angai asked back. Several other Dornishmen chimed in. "I think you are not as good as one of the Prime Minister's guards. Is your person more valuable than the Prime Minister? Let's go, we still have fun all night." Arthur was not angry with these people, who were obviously his subordinates. It was enough for him to convince Angai. There is a story. In the Far East, there was a man named Liu Bei. He went to the thatched cottage 3 times to recruit a well-known strategist. He recounted the 3 visits to the thatched cottage and concluded, "The difference between me and the Prime Minister is not the noble status, but my sincerity." He sent a guard just to recruit you as his guard, and I came here in person to recruit you as a partner, a brother who will live and die together, share honor and disgrace. In terms of nobility, your prince, the Red Viper, is the younger brother of the Lord of Dawn, and the Prime Minister is not much more noble than him. Isn't he doing the same thing as you? Did he say that he wanted you to be his guard? Arthur paused after speaking, letting Ange figure it out for himself. To recruit such a truly powerful person under his command, it is not possible without some sincerity. Tell us in detail why you can't get along well with your neighboring nobles. Ange did not express his choice at the first time, but brought up another topic. It's like this, the heir of the Earl of Raventree in our north pretended to be a bandit. They killed 3 women, one of whom was pregnant with a child to be born. My nephew Arthur did it for justice. Jules was very smart and told the reason for the recent conflict between his family and Raventree. At the same time, several other Dornishmen whispered to Angai. Arthur, who had excellent hearing, heard that they were talking about the beating he had given Cleo and his cousin. "You are a righteous and kind man," Angai said after listening to these 2 stories. He even used honorifics. "I decided to take these brothers with me to serve as your mercenaries for a while, until Raventree no longer harasses your territory." He made the final decision. "Great, I will pay you normal wages." Angai, 13 Dornish spearmen have joined your team. The blue light screen appeared at the right time, letting Arthur know that this group of people had joined sincerely. After discussing where to meet, Arthur left with Jules. Next, they had to find another mercenary group. Bloody Troop. This group of people is much easier to fool. Arthur met them in a very dirty inn. Their leader, Varghoth, was from Koha. He was tall but spoke unclearly. He stammered and put forward his request. 20 gold dragons per person, 1 less, not even 1. "How many people do you have?" "If it's just the few people in front of me, 20 gold dragons per person won't work," Arthur asked back. This group of people are criminals, oath breakers, and hooligans from the free cities. They are recruited only to do things that Arthur cannot do, and to serve as cannon fodder when necessary. A smaller number will not work. A middle-aged mercenary who spoke faster replied, "Of course there are more than this number, but the inns in the city are too expensive, so quite a few brothers live outside the city. If you really want a lot of people, we can recruit brothers wandering on the east coast of Westeros. If time permits, even Essos can come. The total number should be at least more than 200 people." "Yes, that's right," the leader added. Arthur was overjoyed. "Then call them all here, and each person will be charged 20 gold royals. The deposit for your mission can be paid tomorrow." This group of mercenaries are ready-made warriors, with their own weapons and armor. Now that the war is about to begin, it is more cost-effective than training soldiers by yourself. Wager was also very happy. "My lord, I watched your two games today. You will be a..." The stuttering captain wanted to flatter Arthur, but he was stopped by his hand. After leaving the address, Arthur and Jules left. It was late at night, and they walked back to their residence. Tomorrow, Jules will take Arthur to visit other free mercenaries. Although their number is small, they need to visit more times, because they all fight alone. And tonight, Arthur also wants to talk about another thing with his uncle Jules, who has maximumed out his skills in finding people and objects. Dragon eggs. PS. Please recommend on monthly votes. Chapter 75 Plan. According to Arthur's understanding, decades ago, when the tragedy of Summerhall occurred, King Egan V at the time wanted to hatch dragons. He collected 7 dragon eggs, but failed to summon the 7 dragons he wanted, but instead brought disaster. On the border of Stormlands and Dawn, Summerhall, which stood on the border, caught fire and burned the king, the crown prince Duncan the Short, the legendary knight Duncan the Tall, and half of the courtiers to death. This made the Targaryen family, whose population was already declining, even worse. The reason for the failure of hatching dragon eggs was that there were not enough blood magic materials. The blood magic materials here refer specifically to special humans such as people with dragon blood, kings, wizards, etc. According to Arthur's understanding, it is a person with luck. The dragon mother used the 3 lives of the horse king, the witch, and the child in her belly, to exchange 3 dragons with blood magic. In Summerhall, there were only 2 blood magic materials, Egan V and his son Prince Duncan the Short. How could 7 dragons be exchanged? So failure is inevitable. But if these 7 dragon eggs were in Arthur's hands, it would be different. We already know how Egan V failed. How could he fall in the same place? The law of conservation of life must be followed. 1 blood magic material for 1 dragon. In fact, the Targaryen family has a mature and stable technology for hatching dragon eggs, but due to the conspiracy of the Citadel, all the magic-related things were quietly erased by them, so this technology has not been passed down. Therefore, at this point in time, only low-level hatching technology such as blood magic can be used. In reality, there are actually quite a few known blood magic materials. Not to mention that there were 5 kings in the War of the 5 Kings, that is, people with dragon blood, that is, people with Targaryen blood. Because King Robert left seeds everywhere, at least 20 people can be found. Of course, the blood of the deer family is actually twofold. The dragon family bloodline brought by Robert's grandmother, and the dragon family close relatives bloodline left by the ancestors of the deer family. As for wizards, there are even more. Red robe monks, witches, wizards, etc. As long as you have money, you can always find a few. But Arthur is a kind person. He can't just casually exchange a person's life for a dragon's life. So the range of blood magic materials is very small. At least it has to be someone who has committed an unforgivable crime. For example, the bloodthirsty and cruel King Joffrey. When watching TV series in his previous life, Arthur was very sad that the king was easily poisoned to death. Although Joffrey did not get the dragon blood of the deer family, he was a legitimate king and an excellent blood magic material. How can it be wasted like this? This can be exchanged for the life of a dragon, which is expensive. So Arthur decided to send someone to try to find dragon eggs first, and then plan to hatch a dragon. Whether it will succeed or not is another matter, at least prepare first. You know about Summerhall. After we go south and leave the royal forest, I will take people to the river bend to purchase armor and weapons, and you go to the ruins of Summerhall to find a few ellipsoidal stones. In Arthur's room, he whispered to his uncle. The 2 rooms next to it are occupied by his servants, so it is still very safe, and there is no fear of ears on the wall. What's more, he is just a small lord. Which power player in King's Landing would be idle and send people to eavesdrop on his room all the time? What kind of stone? Joel's old face was very surprised. His nephew actually wanted stones. What kind of hobby is this? It's an ellipsoid, usually one color, with very regular scales on the surface, shining with pearls, and it looks very expensive at first glance. Arthur described it, and then carefully reminded, this matter is very important. It is very critical to the revitalization of our family. You must pay attention to it. Go to Summerhall to look for it for a few months or a year. In short, you must find it, at least one. In fact, there is no difference between finding one and finding 7, because they are all put together. Jules was confused for a long time, and then asked carefully, is this stone you are talking about also called a dragon egg? As long as you understand it, you must find it anyway. I will send Soldier Pipe to go with you. Among the 4 people Arthur brought to King's Landing, only Jules and Soldier Pipe had fighting ability. Medden and the stable boy were not combat units, so sending them over would be useless. Too many people would easily attract the attention of the local nobles and the public. Piper grew up in his own territory, similar to the servants in his previous life, and his loyalty was unquestionable. Letting him follow Jules could avoid any unexpected incidents. Jules nodded and asked, how did you know there were dragon eggs in this place? Don't worry about how I know. When you find the dragon eggs, I'll make you a marquis, duke, or even a prince, after I become king. You can choose any castle on my fiefdom. Arthur tempted him. Anyway, he had nothing now, so he just promised him a title and a castle. It was impossible to promise Jules money or gold dragons, because he really had tens of thousands of gold dragons. Also, this matter must be kept secret. If it gets out, I'll greet you with my sledgehammer. Arthur took another step to ensure. Jules nodded with a complicated expression. He was just a scoundrel. How did he suddenly get involved with legendary items like dragon eggs? I'm an idler in Hegian. What use is a dragon egg to me? After discussing the details for a long time, Jules left with an unspeakable heavy heart. Following his nephew, he also has to work. Arthur went to find the Soldier Pipe in the next room. He didn't need to tell him what to do with Jules, just told him to keep a close eye on Jules. This was a family soldier who had never been out of Hegian, and he resolutely followed the words of Lord Arthur. This night passed like this. The next day, Jules and Arthur met with dozens of free mercenaries without stopping. Many of them with excellent reputations were accepted by Arthur on the spot, and some who were in Arthur's eyes were also hired. In the afternoon, the Blood Troop also met with Arthur and others outside the city. There were a total of 113 people. According to their members, the rest were on their way on horseback. Arthur didn't believe it. For a period of time before, the continent of Westeros was extremely peaceful, and this group of mercenaries had no business at all, so the members should leave and find a way out for themselves. Moreover, these people are from the bottom of society. Without a means of communication like ravens, how could they be quickly summoned? But these 100 people are enough. Together with the 97 people hired in the morning, Angai and 13 Dornish spearmen, Arthur's recruitment plan in King's Landing has come to an end. The Bloody Mummers and 97 free mercenaries join your team. Before the evening, the 200 sets of armor from Steel Street were also delivered. The convoy that will transport this batch of armor back to their own territory has been hired and will set off tomorrow. At that time, the 97 free mercenaries and Esmond, Patrick and others will accompany this convoy, escort it back to the Moulin Rouge, and then equip the trained peasant soldiers with armor. The Bloody Mummers will follow Arthur south. The Lord of the Moulin Rouge is a little worried about letting this group of people go to their own territory without him. The twins of the Redwine family will also go south with Arthur. Their faces are the best proof that Arthur has purchased standard armor in the Reach. P.S. Please recommend on monthly votes. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.